Good morning, everybody. This is the board meeting of the Texas State Board of Examiners of Psychologists, and it is, I have 10:03. Today is Friday, the 11th. I'm sorry, Thursday, the 11th of February. Ms. Moore, will you call our roll, please?
Sure. Adler,
Here.
Becker,
Here.
Alamowicz,
Present.
Bridges, Ryan. Ryan, he's on by phone, but he can't participate till later in the meeting because he's on another call, just so you know. Calhoun, Fletcher,
Present.
Palomares,
Present.
Singh. Can you unmute your phone, your mic, Singh?
Absolutely. Sorry. Present.
Thank you. Zagoras? And Donnie, can you unmute your phone, your mic?
Just give thumbs up. Used to do that.
All right. Zagaris, could you give us a thumbs up? There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, we can.
Okay,
All
so
right. We do have a quorum present.
Very good.
Real quick, if I could just mention, I just pulled up, it looks like there's no attendees. Have we allowed people? Or are there no attendees?
Hard to believe.
I think you have to broadcast it, Diane. There's a button possibly there for that?
Hold on. I have my little notes. Let me double check. I don't see an option to do that.
And here I was all excited that my first opportunity to make a fool of myself wasn't going to be broadcast.
It may have been granted. Let's confirm that we are actually live and broadcasting before we go any further.
We should be.
Were you able to find it?
No, I don't see it. Is it down here?
I just thought that was suspicious, so I thought I would mention that.
That's highly suspicious. Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Yeah, there's always a few people who we know will, give public comments.
Webinar. There it is.
Oh
Okay.
man. Okay, we're gonna have to do roll call. Do I have to do roll call again?
Yeah,
Might
let's
want to
start
because then you're
start the
officially
meeting again.
everybody else. So yeah, hit that and then do it probably. See if the attendees.
Okay, it says it's live
Yeah,
now.
now the attendees are coming in. See.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
there you
does
go.
our attorney? We need to start over, correct?
Yeah, let's just do it again. So I forgot to actually start the webinar, even though we
Well,
were.
very good. To the members of the public just joining, don't worry. What you're hearing is we've conducted no business. We were just taking the roll call, but we have had some technical difficulties, and we're gonna do that again. So. I'm John Belamowitz, chair of the Texas State Board of Examiners of Psychologists. I have 10:06 a.m. and we need to call roll to see if we have a quorum present.
Adler,
Here.
Becker,
Present.
Belamowicz,
Present.
Bridges, Calhoun, Fletcher,
Present.
Palomares, I'm sorry.
Palomares, it's fine.
Palomares,
Present.
thank you. Singh,
Present.
all right, and Zagaris.
here.
Thank you. We do have a
Very good.
form to proceed.
Very good. I'm going to take this a little bit out of order. I'm going to just take either a privilege or begin a little bit of the chair's report before we get into public comment. So first of all, again, I'm John Belamowitz, and I'd really like to thank all of you guys, my fellow board members and staff, for being here and participating today. And And most of all, thank you to the public who are also here joining in via this new way of doing things in the era of COVID. My first boss at my first real job after high school taught me the 3 B's. She said, be good, be brief, and be gone. And I'm going to do my best right now to follow that. And for anybody else who cares, if you're ever trying to persuade me of something, that's a good rule to follow. But before we go any further, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge and thank Dr. Tim Brannaman for his service of over a decade of leadership on this board. When his service here was not just for an agency, it was not just for a profession. He served the people of Texas, and he did so much to advance the cause of increasing access to mental health services in this state. And when people are seeking those services, making sure that they're awesome. Also to Dr. Luann Mock, Ms. Angela Downs for their service on this board. When we did these things not via Zoom, Angela always sat across from me and Dr. Mock was at my left, and I appreciate their service, and their presence will be missed. Many times when leadership changes, it's due to some chaos or some other sort of problem that needs solving. And thanks to Dr. Brannaman, this is not one of those times. And I think that that's worth noting. Back in the olden days of yesteryear, 2020, we were still an independent agency. There was so much work done by the staff and the board, legislators, staff, Office of Attorney General, the public, input from the profession. And because of that work, as I start this job, it makes it a whole lot easier for me. And I feel like they're handing me the keys to the cars. The wheels are not about to fall off anytime soon. And that's not to say we don't have some things to address, which we are going to continue to do. As a public member, my perspective is obviously a little bit different. My experience in terms of the practice of mental health is being the one on the couch. And without getting into any specifics, and out of respect to privacy of those involved, among things in my own family and close circle of friends and colleagues, I've been witness and experienced dealing with the breakup of a family and the court deciding who gets the kids. I've seen violence from mental health episodes, depression, suicide, addiction, the fallout from abuse. My experience with these things isn't that special. We treat these things like skeletons in our closets, though, because they're so incredibly and viscerally painful. And many times when we experience these things, they feel like our greatest failures. I mention it, though, because it's worthy to remember the cost of what happens when we get it wrong, and we cannot forget what's at stake here. So moving forward, meetings may feel a little different. My background is in business and real estate, and my approach has always been to gather as much information as possible, make the best decision possible at the time. And after making that decision, we look back for feedback to see if we've made the right decision, if that decision needs adjusting or abandonment, or make that adjustment or the correction as needed. Before we get in also to, I guess this probably has a little bit to do with public comment, is I've heard comment and seen attitudes from stakeholders before that this board has some sort of duty to a profession or to protect a license. I rebuffed that thought then. I want to put it on the record today that the sole reason that this board exists is to protect the people of Texas. And we do that by ensuring that there are regulations, there are limitations, there are hurdles to ensure that bad actors and bad actions can be sanctioned. And then we provide a framework that ensures that we're attracting and retaining the best and brightest to do the hard work of serving the mental health needs of Texans, while all probably making less money than they're actually worth. So I'm not sure you guys can judge if I followed my 3 B's, but I appreciate you guys allowing me that opportunity to share that. And also want to welcome our new board members, Dr. Calhoun, Dr. Singh, and Dr. Becker. Really looking forward to y'all's service and getting to know you guys better over the next months ahead. So with that, I think we'll get into public comment, and I'd like to also remind everybody of the public of what public comment is for. It's a time for you to address the board on issues that you think are important. What it is not, we are not a court. We don't we are a regulatory board that provides a framework for rules. We've heard a lot of comment and historically about very specific things, about specific complaints. And I want to just remind everybody that actually hurts our ability to actually address some of these things. When we address complaints, we try to do so in an impartial way, and having all these things aired out in public jumps the process that we've put in place and are obviously looking at making improvements to. But airing it all out here in public comment does not help us move the ball on addressing a lot of the concerns that you guys rightfully have. So with that, comments are limited to 3 minutes. And are we ready to go with public comment, Ms. Moore?
Yes, so we do have one hand up to give public comment.
Very good.
Give me now. Sandra Martin?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
Okay. You have
Good
public comment?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. I am Sandra Martin. I'm in the chair of the the Governmental Liaison Committee for Christian Counselors of Texas. And I just wanted to let you know, in the past, we have been a bit distant from the concerns of the psychologists in our state. We've kind of seen you as a different kind of animal, but there must be some kind of synergy going on if we're all together under BHEC. And so we're looking forward to getting to know you through monitoring these meetings and being with you in these meetings. We look forward to some discovery about you and how you function. And that's about all I need to say today. And I just want to say, may God bless the work of your hands as you move forward this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Give me one moment here. Carol, do you have public comment?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Moore. I appreciate that. My name is Dr. Carol Grothues. I'm representing the Texas Psychological Association in the BHEC TSBEP Monitoring Committee. And we just want to welcome Drs. Becker, Calhoun, and Singh to the board and congratulate Mr. Vilamowitz as a new chair. We have certainly appreciated his active role on the council and his thoughtful consideration of issues affecting psychological services in Texas, and appreciate his opening comments. We are grateful that you value input from stakeholders to be better providers to the public, and we wish you all well and thank you all for your service.
Thank you, Dr. Grothues.
Welcome.
One second here. Okay. Are there any other public comments? If so, raise your hand. Okay, there are no hands raised and we do not have any attendees by phone. So this concludes our portion for public comment.
Very good. I don't have a whole lot for the chair's report. The only other thing I would add in terms of, I alluded to meetings feeling a little bit different. Robert's Rules of Order is something that I've kind of become accustomed to over time. I'm going to try to move things that are not consequential and not what's the word I'm looking for? Not a big deal. We're going to do it without objection. If it ever feels like I'm moving fast, I would encourage you. I want you to object and say, "Hang on, let's talk about that." And we're going to immediately stop, talk about it, debate it, make the decision that we need to make. But just in the interest of time, for things that are not consequential and not a big deal, I'm going to be moving a lot of times without objection. So that's the only other thing that I would mention there. And if anytime anybody has anything, just feel to speak up. I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Moore. Are you ready for the board administrator report?
Actually, we need to go back up one to approval of the minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just skipped that. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from last time. So moved. It's been moved. There's a second.
I'll second it.
It's been moved by Dr. Palomares and seconded by Dr. Fletcher that we approve the minutes. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed say no. So all
Aye.
in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Hearing none, it is approved. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Moore, for stopping me there. Are we prepared for the administrator report?
Sure.
Awesome.
Starting on page 12 of the meeting book, you can review the quarter performance measures for the council, which includes, of course, TSVEP. Everything that's listed here is for licensing, is reporting that we are exceeding our targets. So in every category, that's we're exceeding the targets for renewals, enforcements received, complaints resolved, and the average time for complaint resolutions. If anyone has any questions regarding that report. Okay. Going to move to the next item. The executive order increasing economic and geographic mobility. This is an order that came out of the White House to reduce the burden of occupational regulations in order to promote the free practice of commerce, lower consumer costs, and increase economic and geographic mobility, including for military spouses. This is something that's out there to bring awareness to reduce any regulatory burdens. The next item is, there was a statement released by the Society for Advancement of Psychotherapy, and they're out of the Division 29 of the APA. And in their statement, they released a statement regarding the EPPP. And pretty much they're looking, their recommendations, their opinion is that the EPPP, the part 2 is creating barriers for the entry of the professional psychology. And they have their recommendations there to plan obsolescence of the current examination and to make adherence to the ASPPB to measure development guidelines for the evaluation of linguistically and culturally diverse peoples as they work towards creation of the new exam referred to as the Part 2. And this is just here as FYI for you guys. I don't know if you guys want to talk about it. Okay. All right. The next item.
I have a comment.
Mm-hmm.
As I read it, I was a little confused, and I'm not sure if they were confused because it talks about one of the recommendations is to eliminate the current exam, Part 1, and then apply these new guidelines with Part 2. But actually, as I understand it, Part 1 and Part 2 are actually designed as two separate exams that are combined together, one measuring knowledge, one measuring competence. So I was a little confused by that one, by those two recommendations, because it's not elimination of just Part 1. It's actually adding Part 2 to 1 to make it a broader test. So I just wanted to raise that if others had seen that or were aware of that as well with this. Thank you.
Thank you. For our SIPAC update, there are 7 jurisdictions that have introduced legislation to join the, to enact the SIPAC in their states. And that's Kentucky, Indiana, Iowa, Minnesota, Ohio, Tennessee, and Washington State. Currently, there are 15 states participating in the SIPAC. And also in the packet here for your review is the recent SciPac newsletter. Just let you know what's going on in there.
I have a question or a point for discussion that if it's more appropriate to be our new business at the end of our meeting, I could totally accept that. What I don't know, and I don't know if it's clear to our stakeholders, if somebody has a license in Colorado, for instance, and they have the e-passport and it's been approved and they're performing services in Texas and there's a board complaint. So the board complaint will go to both boards. And do we have things in our rules and policies that cover e-passport since it's such a new thing? And does that need to be addressed?
If I can help try to answer some of that, that's actually one of, well, some of the rules that were already passed and part of. So I don't know if I got the honor or the short straw. I got put on the rules committee with SciPac to work on more rules on this area. But those were questions that were brought up a lot at the last SciPac meeting. And so, yes, they can file a complaint with both. And under the rules, both jurisdictions work together. Small correction, they need to get their e-passport, but then they also need to have their APIT. And so you have to get both. The e-passport comes from ASPPB. APIT comes from SciPac. And once they have their APIT and their license in Colorado, they're allowed to do it. But if there's a problem with it, the two jurisdictions work together in investigating the complaint. Ultimately, it'll probably come down to Colorado, where the person is actually licensed, so that, but where the actual discipline would occur, because they have an APIT, they don't have a Texas license. But there's it's being developed a little bit. Some of the nuances are going to be developed further in the rules developed.
So if I could just add, since you got the short stick and you're benefiting all of us by being on that committee, I think that not only is it confusing to someone with a license with the e-passport, but I think it's confusing to the public. And if somebody's in Texas, the expectation is that they would make a complaint to Texas, not understanding all this rigmarole, it's difficult. So, so it sounds like it's in process. But if a complaint comes to the Texas State Board, that that can be addressed and they can be navigated with what they need to do, even though we haven't had the opportunity to put any of it on the website or anything like that. Would that be correct?
I think that's pretty close. Currently they can file a complaint with us, and we would cooperate with Colorado. There would probably be two complaints open that would investigate that same matter. If they're licensed in Colorado, we could definitely file a complaint with them as well. But I think the way it stands right now, and since there'll be more discussion with the Rules Committee on this, I don't know that I want to say with 100% certainty, but I think right now, ultimately Colorado would probably be taking the action against the actual license, because the license is held in Colorado. But people can certainly file complaints with Texas and Colorado. And so if it comes to one or the other, there's already rules in place that if you're a member of SciPac, you have to cooperate, you have to share information, and it's actually in the statute too. So there's nothing that would prohibit us from releasing information. If somebody says, "Oh, I can't do that by law," no, there's already laws in place to put in to share that, so that the investigation would be a sort of a joint investigation.
Okay, and I just want to make sure everyone knows I'm not picking on Colorado. I just looked at the list of the 15 participating states, and there are 15. And if I can just make sure everybody knows, it's Arizona, Colorado, Delaware, Georgia, Illinois, Missouri, Nebraska, Nevada, New Hampshire, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, the good state of Texas, Utah, Virginia, and North Carolina currently.
So Patrick, if I can clarify, just so the expectation is that the home state jurisdiction will most likely take the lead disciplinary action in a case like that. even when the individual is providing services in another state. There's cooperation between the two state jurisdictions, but the expectation is that in most cases, it's going to be the home state where the individual is licensed that will take those actions.
That's my general understanding, because the way the rules are written, you have to have a designated home state, and then you have to have and you have to be in that home state when you're providing telepsychology services to any of the other 14 states that are currently in. So since they have that license in that home state, that's where that license is going to have discipline against it. So we may have complaints in Texas where they harmed somebody in Colorado, and so we're going to be prosecuting them here in Texas more than likely. But yeah.
All right, thank you.
That concludes my report. We can go ahead and move into the enforcement agenda.
Very good. Is Mr. Fernandez going to start us off there?
Yes, sir. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Good to see you.
Good to see everybody. I want to start off with the dismissals, and it's cases 1 through 3 that have been closed since our last meeting here, and I want to open it up to see if anybody has any questions on those. Nope. Okay.
I think we're good.
All right. Now we're going to move on to the status report. Ms. Moore is going to handle that.
Sure, that's fine. All right, the status report for enforcement. We had 96 pending complaints for the first quarter, and we received 19 new complaints. 3 cases are dealing with alleging sexual violations. And we have 2 cases regarding their application issues. Cases resolved are 7. Out of those, 5 were dismissed by staff and 2 dismissed by the board. Oops, 1 second. And the total cases.
Is this, quick question,
Yes.
Are these pending applicant cases, are we taking up one of those today, or is that separate?
Taking up 2.
We're taking up 2 of them, both
Gotcha.
of them.
Good deal.
Thank you. All right. So the pending cases broken down by the fiscal years, there's 8 out of 2019 for fiscal year 19. For fiscal year 2020, there's 69 cases. And for 2021, there's 19 cases.
Very good.
Okay.
We're moving on to changes to projected time schedules.
There are none to report at this time.
Very good. All right. This moves us to discussion on selection of ISC panels. We have talked about the idea of keeping this, or doing this a little bit more ad hoc as needed. I am open to hearing about what the thoughts are on that versus doing this where we seat the ISC like the day before a board meeting. So that I would open that up to the discussion there.
What we're trying to propose now is, instead of requiring 3 board members for scope of practice cases, just bringing in the expert that we need. It would more conform to what I would need to do at SOA. I would bring in, if it's an LSSP case, I bring in the board member that's LSSP, and likewise. So it would be more flowing towards what, if needed, would happen at SOA.
And how much notice would a fresh board member get that they will be needed for such a for that ad hoc meeting?
In practice, I try to do these the notices 30 days out, so it gives time for both the respondent and everybody to prepare.
And if I can provide just a little bit more background, one of the things, the reason why I bring this up is this is sort of a system that we've started using with some of the other boards. And before, whenever we were all in person, we would of course have the ISCs the day before, and there would be a full day or sometimes 2 days before, we would jam them all in. Now that we're able to, and starting to do more of these things by Zoom, we're able to do them on more of an as needed basis, as opposed to having to stagger them all together. And so what some of the other boards are is helpful to kind of resolve these complaints is they're able to speak with board members, see when is a good available time, set it for an afternoon that they have free, do an ISC and take care of that case. So it's more of an ad hoc as needed basis. The one thing to kind of point to is part of the rules change with BHEC is under BHEC's rules, staff can do some of the ISCs themselves. A board member doesn't have to be present for every single ISC. Those would be primarily ones, the standard is if we don't need an expert. And then maybe an example would be if it's a records violation and the complaint is, I didn't get my records within 15 days and it took them 6 months. That's not really something we need an expert to talk about the timeframes. But if we're talking about, a forensic matter or something where did they score this test properly? Did they misdiagnose this person? We're going to want a professional member's opinion, because the standard would be we're probably going to need an expert potentially if this goes to prove up this case later. And so depending on the type of case, if it's an LSSP case, if it's an LPA case, if it's an LP case, those would be sort of the expertise that we would want to rely on. And so it obviously is dependent on board members' schedules. We wouldn't force them to have to, work. We will work around them. But I think we're finding it working quite well with the other boards, and so we wanted to bring that up with you guys to see if that was something that we could do as well.
Patrick, you mentioned the fact that you may not need all the staff can do the ISCs. I recall when I was early on the board, I was the public member on it. I remember Daryl talking to us like, I have to be there because you can't run the ISC without a public member. Is that the same, different, or does staff cover that?
Yeah, there was a statutory requirement under the old 501 that said we had to have a public member. We had to have it made up that certain way. The way that when House Bill 1501 came in and rewrote everything, it changed it dramatically, and essentially it allowed flexibility for, that's why BHEC passed a rule that says we can have an ISC where we don't even have a board member, but we wanted to use a board member when there was something that we knew we needed an expert opinion on. So as long as, I think the max amount that you can have is 3 board members at an ISC under BHEC's rules, but we can go as low as 1. You could have 2. But honestly, the most important thing is being able to use that professional opinion, that having that professional there to provide that opinion is really helpful and crucial in those ISCs. So that's why, if we can get that one person to help help review it, that's extremely helpful for staff. So, but yeah, it's the statutory change. Sorry, John, to ramble on.
Thank you for clarifying that. I'll just say my 2 cents is that I've always appreciated being involved in the ISC process. It's, to me, those are the problems that, well, even when I mentioned in my opening remarks, like the sanctioning bad actors and bad actions, that is where the rubber hits the road from my perspective. I think it's important for us to be involved in that. The logistics of getting everyone together for a full day, sometimes 2 days, that is a big ask. It's way easier if we get the right people involved. For me, it would be a lot easier to get the right people involved for a certain case, and we, hammer through a case and, carve out however long we need, an hour and a half, as needed, with the, the best of the board of whose expertise that falls in.
I have a question. So in the other boards, obviously we have in our board, the professional members could have 3 different licenses, right? The LSSP, LPA, licensed psychologists. And the other boards for their professional members, is it all the same, or do you separate LMSWs for the social work board, LCSWs? You separate LPC supervisors between normal LPCs, all that stuff? Or is it all, can any one of them do the same function for this purpose?
You're speaking solely for an ISC purpose, correct?
Yes.
Right. And I mean, the short answer to that is we would just use one professional member, and it wouldn't be, specific to, we wouldn't need an LPC associate to serve on for an LPC associate issue. We would use an LPC.
Right.
So we would, for social work, I'm trying to remember the board members that we have, but I think it's an LMSW that might review things. But if it was an LCSW complaint, we might want to use an LCSW for it. So it would be helpful to use the specific person for it. But yeah, you don't quite have it. The diversity of licensure is a little bit different with psychology. So
this would be the only board that really would require such a difference in like the licenses, like would require such a more deliberate, whoever that expert would be based on the license.
I would say the closest one would be social work, because LMSW and LCSW might be the big difference there.
Okay.
But yeah.
Okay.
So do we need an action? Do we need a motion and action on this, or is this something that we can generally decide by consensus here to? We're going to change this. Patrick, is that a question for you?
Yeah, I mean, if you want me to answer it, I will.
I would love it.
I don't think you need an official motion and a decision, but it's more just a consensus. This is sort of the policy of how we're going to move forward, because under the rules, it's just sort of a general policy. These are the people that are appointed to. So I guess this is how we've done it with the other boards, is they've just sort of assigned different people to essentially a disciplinary enforcement or ISC committee. And that's sort of the pool of licensees that we would go down and say, okay, I'm going to ask the first one, are you available on this date? No. Okay, let me see is the next one available on that date? And so we would be able to just reach out to members of that committee and see if they would be willing to if they're available and they're willing to sit in for that ISC that they're wanting to schedule. So you can just set that by sort of agreement or by a committee assignment. You don't need a official action or vote, I guess.
So is that what I'm kind of thinking is I've got the ISC panel list up on my other screen here. It sort of makes it less relevant to maybe that's who we rotate through and call first for a case that comes up. But if there's something that requires a different skill set, we might call somebody else. Am I getting anything wrong there, or does that sound?
No, I mean, if you wanted to keep it sort of rotating, the issue with that, obviously why we had that schedule, right, is because we had an in-person meeting. So those are the people that we were going to have show up that day. But if you want to just sort of have a list of people on there, or we could keep having the rotating. So during those periods of time, go to. It's kind of up to you. What the other boards have done is just had specific members on there, and they would just we'll go down the list to see who's available, who we would go down the batting order to see who we could use.
I kind of like the idea of keeping everybody involved, and we have 3 new members that I'd like to see involved in that process. So I think that I don't know if you and me or Mr. Fernandez and me keep in touch and get the right people for the right ISCs, to me that seems like getting the right heads and the right brain trust together for the challenges of getting those done. Does anyone disagree with that? I'd love it if somebody would argue with me if you want to do something different.
I have an argument, but Ron was first.
Okay.
So I have I guess what I see is there's 2 different questions kind of on the floor. One is moving to having these on-call meetings as needed, rather than having a single date set every quarter or 2 dates set every quarter for a long meeting. And so I would like to take these separately, because I see that as being one, and then who constitutes an ISC committee or the hearing group. And I have some, I'm fine with having the on-call quarterly assignments to have these meetings whenever they come up within the queue. So that's one side, and I support that. I would like to have some more conversation about who actually constitutes members on an ISC. Because my concern is, having sat on a number of these, I have always valued, especially having a public member. All of you have been wonderful having your point of view on this, as well as just having others involved with it in making those decisions. These are critical decisions. They impact individuals' lives, not just the licensee, but also the public. And I think having a single professional that has that license or that content expertise for this, making that decision, for me, I always rely on having the other two members present, especially a public member, because you as all the public members, I value you so much on this. You bring a different perspective that sometimes I'm not aware of, especially early on. Having more of just my knowledge experience as a licensed psychologist and as a licensed specialist in school psychology, that's kind of the lenses. And over time, I've been working hard to expand that to consider it in other views. But having you bring that in, so I would like to have a conversation on the, I guess seeing this as two separate things. One is looking at, is everyone in agreement on having these on-call meetings or these meetings as they come up? And then the second is actually who constitutes the components of the board members for the individual ISCs.
I have to pick it back up what Ron said. I agree, because even if I appreciate you being like, I would be labeled as an expert, but even in those situations, one, like me being the only one just like thinking about that seems kind of, could be in a way, I would almost always maybe want to check with another psychologist just to make sure my thinking is right. I would never feel totally confident, because these issues are always murky. They're never clear. And even though you're considering me an expert, I mean, I would likely hardly ever feel very confident that I was making the right call, especially as Ron said, and how the implications are this person's career. It just seems too much to put in the hands of one person, one expert person,
Yeah. That was going to be, excuse me, that was going to be my point. We listened to the evidence, and if I was the attorney representing one of these people coming to the ISC, I might take issue with just having one and only voting and saying, yeah, we're going to go ahead and do this, or you were guilty. Before it was, Ron, do you agree? Susan, do you agree? Kind of we get a little round table deal. And by the way, most of the cases, it's obvious, what's going to happen. There are some of those that you have to be determining, do we think somebody's lying or not? And so I would hate to be in the sole position of saying, I don't know if that makes any sense for one person versus several. Yeah.
And Donnie, that's a great call out. And just to echo some of Ron's thoughts about the different heads and the different expertise in the room. As a public member, when sometimes we get out of those ISCs and everyone goes out, and it's like, all right, Dr. Palomars, educate me on this part of whatever. And then there's other times where there was consensus, and I kind of at a different perspective, I'm like, hey, stop the brakes here. Let's look at this. And so from everything in terms of the diversity of opinions and experience and diversity of backgrounds, I agree that I think there still needs to be a panel of three with different members. And if there is a reason to sub out somebody for some specific reason, I think we could probably take that on its own. But it doesn't sound like there's a whole lot of disagreement on doing this. If we kept selecting rotating through as we have been with the three, it doesn't sound like there's a whole lot of pushback on doing this via Zoom throughout the quarter as needed. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if there was ever a reason to start changing the makeup, we could do that. But this is more of a practicality and schedule thing that seems like low-hanging fruit to make this thing run more efficiently for both the board and for the people who have to come before an ISC. Because if it doesn't need to hang out there for an extra 2 months and we can get together, well, let's get together and let's get it handled.
Yeah.
Patrick, does that sound like enough direction?
It does. Can I ask a couple clarifying questions? One would be, so I'm thinking we'll probably want to keep going with the schedule where we're having, those are the three people on call each quarter. And then, so we'll call them and try to work them out. The follow-up to that would be, if we're going to do that, would it be possible, because sometimes coordinating 3 people's schedules and making sure everybody has the same Thursday afternoon slot might be tricky. If we're able to get at least 2 people, you know, to agree to it or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, is it something where it's okay for us to go forward with doing that IC, or you want to get a consensus of all 3?
I mean, I would, we've got 9 people on the board. If somebody can't be there, we can sub somebody else in if the schedule just really doesn't work. And if we've got 30 days notice, I have to believe that we can find a time 30 days out that 9 times out of 10, the 3 on call for that quarter should be able to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. So just to look for an alternate then for if we can't.
Yeah.
On the 3rd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's happened before. Somebody has something come up, and you know, if I'm the public member, I'll ask Ryan to cover for me, and vice versa. So I just don't see that as a big issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So does that sound like enough direction? Does anybody?
I think that's clear, John. Does that make sense for you going forward? Do you have any questions? You're good? Okay.
I think the other question that I have is just ensuring that we have an LSSP on that list, or someone, if we don't, because not all our LPA members and not all our LP members have LSSPs. And so if for one of these quarters, we don't have an individual who is a licensed specialist in school psychology, that we have someone then with an LSSP on standby in case a case comes forward where you need that expertise.
I believe are you speaking to me, sir? In terms of, because I would have both credentials, but I certainly don't want to be hogging up the ISC. That wouldn't be it. But another concern, some of us have a lot of stuff to do. I am retired, so maybe we could use staff that has, you know, I know a lot of you are very busy doing a lot of stuff. You all go ahead and bounce that one around. You know, you're not going to bother me making me come to a meeting.
Well, if it's you or me, Andoni, like, I'm sure I can work it out. Like, it's like, it's like,
I know.
It's not a big deal. Like for more than once, like I can, if it's a month before, I can squeeze out an hour and a half free, most likely, you know?
Yeah.
I just wanted to add just real quick that I would not agree to anything less than 3. And the reason is because I think for the person making the complaint, when we do have people in ISCs who participate, who have made complaints, I just believe it helps them feel heard. We ask really good questions, if I may say so myself, especially the public member. I think that it just validates for them that they did the right thing to make the complaint, whether the person making the complaint is somebody who receives services or a therapist of someone and it was their duty to make the complaint. I just really think it's just really good all the way around for anyone that participates on the other side of the table in an ISC to have 3 bodies who are listening, asking questions, obviously have read the materials prior, that it just validates the importance of the process. And it makes it less personal. So it's not just one person that, you know, Dr. Palomares or Dr. Fletcher said, you know, they're the reason that I had these sanctions.
Right.
I really would like to stay away from it being personalized to one person on the board for the benefit of all. And I think having 3, I know I participated in some really good, somewhat heated at times conversations when the 3 people in the ISC representing the board disagree, and it allows us to consider a lot of alternatives, make sure we're consistent, get more information if we need to. And I just think you don't get that if you have less than 3. So I'm appreciative of the conversation and the way we're all going. I think we're hearing that board members do not mind ISCs at all and take it very seriously and see that as a big part of something every single board member does.
Yep. Well said, Dr. Fletcher.
One other quick
ahead,
kind of clarifying point is just to be clear, it sounds like, so out of the 3, one we want a public member, and then for the other 2 we want professional. But because the way the statute was written before, it was public a master's doctoral level, that's the way we always had it. Do you want to open up the other two to just be a professional so that it could be somebody that it could be two doctoral or doctoral and LSSP or both master's level, not necessarily, we're not required to have it. And that's why I'm asking, do we want to open up the two professional to kind of the whole pool as opposed to the specific license type?
I think my preference would be diversity of the group, but if push comes to shove and you can't get two PhDs, or you know, if we can proceed, that's better. I mean, that's okay. It would be better to have more diversity of credentials.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, just do the same thing as we did before, the same makeup as before, same requirements as before, right?
Yeah.
That's what we valued so much, and that's what we think works so well. So just, you know, one professional, of the two professionals, one PhD, one LPA. Out of those two, one has to be an LSSP. Well, I don't know if that was a official requirement before. I don't remember that, but
yeah, it was. One was a professional, one was a master's level, like an LPA, then one was like a doctoral level, and so, or it could be, I guess, an LSSP. But it was, I think it was, those were the three kind of categories.
Right. So I would just suggest keep it as similar as possible.
Okay.
Also, just to drive it home, Patrick, it sounds like you mentioned that ISTs could be done by staff. It sounds like we don't want to head that direction, and that we want to keep doing this as with board members.
Well, we will do, because under the rules, we will do some when they are a very routine things.
Okay.
We don't, there's really, like, I'll take the example of the records rule, right? All it is they didn't give me my records for 6 months. You know, we don't really need to waste your guys' time with that, to be honest with you.
And you were already doing that prior to this discussion anyways, correct? That's not necessarily changed. Yeah,
correct. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Once the VHEC rules got implemented, we were just trying to do those.
That's fine.
Yeah. Just for everybody listening, the point is that we're not handing over anything else to staff that staff wasn't already doing. It doesn't mark a change from how things have already been. Okay, so it sounds like we're good there, except for we need to make some assignments, it looks like, for September 1st through November 30th of this year. And then we need, it looks like, a public member for September 1 to November 30th this year. And then we're wide open for the fourth quarter of this, I'm sorry, that's of 2021.
I believe it's a typo.
Okay, wait, so what do we do? Okay, that's
no,
for this year.
It's going to go into next year, February 2022. Sorry.
22, okay, there we go.
Yeah.
All right, so volunteers?
Yeah, I mean, I'll volunteer, you know, as LPA whenever whatever's needed. So I could do.
Alfonso, you're noting this, correct?
I am.
Thank you.
Happy to get involved in this as well. Is this something that I could potentially observe one prior to actually being a part of it and being an active member of it? Because I feel like it would help me to observe it at least once first.
That's what I did when I became a board member.
Patrick, does that not mess us up in terms of getting too many cooks in the kitchen?
We'll have to recuse her because she'll
right. She can't vote. But
right, you won't be able to vote later. So the problem is then that takes 4 people out of potential voting later. But we can do it. We just don't want to put too many people in the room. So.
It is very helpful. When I did it, I thought it was extremely helpful because you have no idea like what it's like until you're in the room. It's
I got thrown into the fire. It wasn't that bad. I mean,
okay,
Dr. Becker, I think you'd be
I will
good
do
at
it. I will do it whichever way y'all think it makes the most sense.
I think you will be great.
I generally like to see what I'm doing before I'm, changing things for people's lives.
No, if you go into it with your ears and mind open, I think you're going to do just fine.
And I'll keep you informed as much as possible.
I'm game for whenever you need me.
Sounds
good.
I will do anything you want me to do. I'm just trying to understand how the procedure is working. And I don't have any problem working on this issue. I mean, if this special meetings, that you might have to have? Because I've worked for a long time with complaints about students, so I'm not afraid about dealing with complaints.
Very good.
So I can handle that.
We need, I'm sorry, do we have a public member yet for September 1 through November 30th?
We do not.
I'm confused because now we have 3 doctors that just got appointed. So Dr. Calhoun, you are our other public member. I'm embarrassing myself by not knowing that. That's correct, right?
Yes, I am.
All right.
Yeah.
We have Dr. Fletcher there on that one. Would you want to potentially jump into the fire for us later this year?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Add, you're not jumping into the fire. There's nothing to fear. It is such an important part of what we do, and I feel confident anybody going in the first time, they hand you a script, you listen. The process is so well choreographed and allows for such important discussion. I'm confident anyone going into that will feel that they've been given the tools they need to do what is expected.
And Dr. Calhoun, you'll be with Dr. Fletcher in that one, so you're gonna have some someone good to learn from.
Very great. Thank you, Dr. Fletcher.
All right, what do we need for December, the next one? Do we have a public member yet?
No, I think the only one for sure is Mr. Adler.
Okay, I'll volunteer for that one. I don't know if Ryan is on right now, but I'll volunteer for that one. If Ryan wants to fight me for it, he can fight me for it later.
Okay.
And what do we need? Who else do we need for that one?
I heard both Dr. Becker and Dr. Singh are willing to do it, and so one of those for for that December.
I'm game.
Let's do. I think we had Dr. Becker. Is that right? Dr. Becker spoke up.
Like I said, I'm game.
You're game. Okay. Dr. Singh, we'll get you. I appreciate your willingness to step up. Okay. That's that, correct? That moves us over to dismissals for board ratification.
We don't have any for this meeting.
Okay. That makes it easy. Review of agreed orders. Going to
No new
6B.
ones. The 3 that are attached were already taken care of last meeting.
Mhm.
So there's nothing to review, nothing to ratify.
No, sir.
And nothing from SOA as well?
Nothing currently, no, sir.
Okay, we're just flying through this. Brings us to 7 committee reports, application committee. Mr. Zaguris and Dr. Palomares, can you, are you guys ready to lead us through this discussion a little bit?
Yes, and so I believe Mr. Bridges was going to kind of start us off with a brief summary, and then I have some items that I'd like to raise on each of these to clarify it for everyone as we move forward to consideration and then take action.
Very good, thank you.
I have 2 individuals. One is listed as Velma Jean Stanley. I understand she goes by Jean though, so I'm trying to call her Jean. She is represented by counsel. I was told that they would be here, so I'm hoping they appear in the queue. And she has a problem with supervision. Under 46311D2, she is failing on the B, C, and I. There were not 2 designated staff psychologists, and there were no 2 full-time licensed psychologists as primary supervisors, and there were no 2 full-time equivalent interns on during her internship.
So the question in front of us or the questions to look at with Dr. Stanley are those 3 items. It's related to her internship, her application for licensure as a licensed psychologist. It's under the area of internship. And as Mr. Bridges explained specifically, she did not have a staff psychologist supervising her on site during her internship. She did not have 2 or more licensed psychologists engaged in supervision during internship, and there were not 2 or more interns on site during her internship. She was supervised, her supervising psychologist did meet with her on a weekly basis, but was not on the site greater than 20 or more hours. It was reported that there was she was supervised by the clinic director, but that individual was not a licensed psychologist. So there was just really that her supervision during internship. Those 2 issues is not having her supervisor on site more than half the time, and the other is that she only had 1 licensed psychologist engaged. The other piece to it is that that requirement of having 2 or more interns. There's the expectation that during an internship there is that important component that goes along with having someone engaged in the same activity as you're engaged in during that internship to facilitate learning, expand experiences, knowledge, and so forth. And so being a single intern with only 1 supervising psychologist, that's the crux of the issue around her internship. There are 2 other items that I wanted to point out when I was reviewing her application. They're minor, but I do want to raise them. One is on the supervisor's license. This is on page 53. The supervisor reports that indicates that he was a licensed psychologist between August 31st of 2009 to August 31st of 2011. And that does fall within the part of her internship, but her internship actually expands beyond that. She reports the internship was from 5/1/2010 to 10/25/11, so from May to October. And so there's not an indication on that the individual was, her supervisor was licensed during those last 3 months. He reports that he was licensed up to August 31st. I don't know if that's just if there was a typo there and that he actually had maintained a license during that time, but according to that, what that looks like on her application or the form that he filled out as her supervising psychologist is that he was not licensed during those last few months of her internship. The other is a question of titles. And so she reports on page 50 that during her internship, her title was psychologist trainee. And during her postdoc, this is reported on page 51 and also on page 60 by her supervisor, that her title was psychological intern. And so I have a question about that. My expectation is in our language is that an intern would be during your internship year, postdoc would be a trainee title. And these were actually reversed, and it's listed on by both of them, by herself and her supervisor. So there's a question on there, but but the real issue where it falls, well, I guess the supervisor's license piece needs to be confirmed as well. Was he licensed during that time? Is an issue, but the real question that comes forward for us is this piece about not having 2 licensed psychologists supervising her, not having her supervisor on site for more than half the time during her internship, and not having the 2 interns in the internship program.
The rules are there for a purpose. They're asking us to waive the rule requirements based on regional characteristics, if there's not anybody around. In most cases, people drive after work and make arrangements to get their hours in and the supervision that's appropriate. So I'm afraid that the only option would be what she was told in a letter, I believe, from Monica, that said your option is to go back and get an appropriate qualifications for the rules. Go back and get the proper internship and supervision.
And I just wanted to add, it looks like Ms. Dalrymple and Dr. Stanley have their hand raised and they're in attendance. If you would like to give them an opportunity to speak and address some of Dr. Palomares' points, now might be a good time, unless you want to.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Does anyone else have anything real quick before we do that? Because I would like to hear from them. Okay. Yep, let's hear from him. Can we open that up? All right.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, good deal. All right, well, good morning. First, I want to thank all of you for the opportunity.
Uh-oh,
I just lost
her too.
Okay.
One moment.
And I didn't say this, but let's try to keep this to about 3, not more than a few minutes. I don't want to rush anybody. I want to hear what you guys have to say.
Mr. Blamowitz, we were
ma'am.
told that Dr. Stanley would have 10 minutes, and that's what we've
10 minutes?
planned for.
Okay, well then, if that's what you're told, I'm not gonna argue with it. Let's keep it to that, and let's hear it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll be good and brief.
Very good.
Yeah. I'm here today, obviously, to talk about the deficit in the pre-doctoral internship. And I really appreciate, first of all, the opportunity and the process, actually, that exists to even do that. So to give you a little bit of background, I attended North Central University. It's completely online. The program was accredited, and I relied, and this was 10 years ago, I relied heavily on actually entirely on the internship advisor that I had. And I went through the program from 2008, I believe, and finished some years later. And my doctoral internship was, I believe, 2010, 2011. And to address the question about licensure of my supervisor, I'm certain that he was licensed. Documentation, I suppose we could get. But anyway, the basis of it was that even though I finished in 2004, going forward, I was just the LPC still, even though I was practicing as a PhD level LPC. And in doing that, in the small area that I live, the rural area of East Texas, I was still very much aware that even though I was PhD level, there were still so many services that were needed in our communities, our catchment area, that I was not able to provide. And there's just very, very few psychologists around. And so in the process of discussing all of that with some of the colleagues that my paths crossed, whom I trust, I was encouraged to pursue that and to not leave just doing the PhD, but to make full use of my PhD and do that in such a way that I could broaden the services in the community. So time happens, and in 2008, I committed fully to that
2018.
Yeah. I committed fully to that process and applied to sit for the exam. I was beyond thrilled that I could do that. And over the next 2 years and 4 months of pandemic, I did everything that I needed to do in order to meet the criteria, and still had no idea that the internship that I had would leave me short of fully complying with board standards. And so I passed my EPPP in August of 2020, submitted all my paperwork, and then I found out that this was a deficit. And of course,
in November, that was the first time either of us knew that there was any deficit in her undergraduate training that occurred over a decade ago.
I'm sorry. I submitted it in, and then the letter was dated in November. That was the first time I knew of it. And of course I was stunned because I had no idea. And And so here I am, and I'm following the path. I'm still fully committed. I've lived in East Texas for 30 years. I've practiced here for 20 years, and I'm not going anywhere. And the deficit is huge here for psychological services, and there are very few who provide them. And some of those are likewise reaching, they're retired or about to, and they're eager to have someone who can provide those services. And I'm eager to do that because there's such a gap in the services here. So I'm following the path that has been given to me in this appeal process, and basically asking the board for consideration to either offer approve a waiver of that particular piece of it from 10 years ago, or perhaps provide a remedy that would be a viable remedy for me to do that would offset this deficit. And so that is it pretty much in a nutshell. As far as the terminology is concerned, I feel certain that I got those reversed. and so beyond that's what I would have to say, unless Ms. Dalrymple wants to add anything further.
You did a good job, Dr. Stanley, in laying that out. The issue was back in 2010, did Dr. Stanley have any reason to think that her PhD program would not set up an internship that complied with board rules? And of course, the answer was no. When I was in law school 27 years ago, it never occurred to me to go and check and make sure that my law school program was following state bar rules. Do we wish that she had thought to do that? Well, yes. Dr. Stanley is not your garden variety applicant. She's not fresh out of college. She's not fresh out of a master's program. When she started her PhD, she was an incredibly experienced clinician. She has a marvelous reputation, not just in East Texas, but throughout the state. People know her, they know the quality of work she does. For someone young, perhaps, Dr. Palomares, if they didn't have another intern on site to share the experience with, we understand why the requirement is there. But this is a special case. Dr. Stanley was not someone who was going to be hindered or not get the most out of her internship experience if there was not another intern on site. Unfortunately, within about a 3-hour driving radius, there was no other option for the internship. I mean, obviously, if we could turn the time back, we would do it, but we can't. So here we are finding out 10 years later that something in her pre-doctoral internship wasn't exactly right. And our options were to bring this forward and to request either a waiver of those requirements these 10 years later, or some sort of viable option that Dr. Stanley could go back and do. It's truly up to you. We want to fix it if it needs to be fixed. If it can't be fixed, we want you to sincerely consider whether or not these are requirements that could be waived at this late date. Thank you.
I'm muted. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for laying that out. I have a couple questions, and I'm sure there's plenty of here to discuss, but what I'd like to know and hear from the board is if we moved on this or didn't move on this, let's assume for a second we did approve it, what is the risk to the public? And is there any, did the geographic constraints, how much weight does that carry? So I'd love to hear the thoughts of the board.
May I ask, before we have that discussion, if there's any questions we have for Dr. Stanley, can we ask those first to get a little bit more information?
Absolutely.
That'll help us with the questions. I'm very attentive to the fact that she works in a rural area where there aren't a lot of services, and I think that's I'm going to lead into the question you were just asking. And I would just ask if she could just review very briefly the services she does provide, because it is in a rural area and we are looking at protecting the public, but also services being provided to the public. I'd like to give her that opportunity to talk just very briefly about the services she provides and the public that she serves, the issues that she addresses.
Thank you, Dr. Fletcher. I would be happy to answer that question. I provide individual psychotherapy, group psychotherapy. I also do forensic work, and such that I have utilized for most of the entirety of my practice, doing testing. We service the schools that make referrals. We have children's clinics in the community who desperately need psychological services. We have a VA at the Veterans Administration just right down the road that has reached out, and CPS. We have 2 foster care facilities, group home type facilities there for at-risk children who need often need, well, they've asked about psychological services. The court systems have people there, and the services that I provide within, I have me personally and then my practice, but for me personally, they have to, the clients who need psychological evaluations for diagnostic purposes. We have a psychiatrist in town who refers, and I've been working under the letter that I initially got from the board, and so I've been able to fill that gap somewhat. And so it's just a broad range of rural areas that have so few services for people. And as a professional, I want to be able to provide the higher quality services and the credibility that goes along with the licensure. And while I appreciate having my PhD, at the end of the day, I'm a PhD, just an LPC, and so that higher quality credibility, and I understand that licensure is there for a reason. The things that only a licensed psychologist can do, it's there for a reason. And so I've worked very hard to reach that level to be able to provide those services. And this is the wall. This is what's stopping me. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, thank you for your response.
Dr. Stanley, I have a question for you also. In your work as an LPC, if your request was denied, and I would expect that you would continue working as an LPC, what would change in your practice, in what you do, not so much as the practice setting or what other colleagues are doing, but what would change in what you would do with your PhD as an LPC?
If I were to be denied, or if it were approved, what else could I do? Am I understanding your question? I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. No, if it was denied, what changes? What's the difference between practicing as a LPC with your PhD and using the knowledge that you have? What's different from practicing as an LPC versus what you could do differently if you were licensed as a psychologist?
Okay. Currently, because I've been practicing under the letter of being, or had been until I found out my license was in jeopardy, I was able to provide psychological evaluations. I was also being trained with competency. I had been shaping my trainings around like my continuing educations. So I wouldn't be able to do any of that. I would not be available to the court system. I wouldn't be able to available to CPS. to do their psychological evaluations for their referrals, their services. You know, obviously I would continue doing therapy. I would continue, if denied, I would continue doing therapy. I would continue doing, I would be utilizing assessments within the scope of my LPC. I could continue doing that, but I can't call my work a psychological evaluation. If I am in a case that involves any kind of litigation or court or whatever, you know, I know that being a licensed psychologist carries with it much more credibility. Whenever I talk to my clients and they ask me my credentials, people will call my office all the time and they want a licensed psychologist. And so the services that I would be able to offer would be much more limited. And as far as what would change, I'd have to not do those services anymore at all and go back to doing the limited scope of evaluations and the limited scope of services. And I would have to refer out anybody who called for psychological services. I wouldn't be able to do it.
All right, thank you. And I have one follow-up question. Sure. Have you been working as a psychologist trainee since your graduation from your internship in 2011 until up to current times?
No, I did not. Whenever I didn't finish college until, I didn't finish my PhD until 2014. Unfortunately, my school was one of those where it took a while for me to get finished. And so I finished actually formally in 2014. And there were some, my father was dying and we cared for him, my sister and I, and that was a prolonged experience. And so I wasn't available emotionally or, you know, time-wise to invest in the process of getting the license. And I had almost given up on it until some of my colleagues encouraged me to pursue it, although it had been a while.
And that was in 2018, correct?
Yes, that was in 2018. And by then we had dealt with some of the other things in my family. And so I sent in my paperwork, honestly, not even really knowing if I would be eligible to sit for the exam. And as I said before, I was beyond thrilled and honored to be able to work toward that goal. And that's what I did, tenaciously.
Dr. Stanley, tell them how long you've been working under your provisional letter. I think that may have been what Dr. Palomares was asking.
That I received in April, on April the 4th, I believe was the date of 2018. And I began immediately with the supervision and did so until, I mean, I actually, even when I finished my hours, I continued seeing my supervisor, you know, everything. And finally, even with the pandemic and all of those things, I finished and completed all of the requirements, I thought, and then submitted all my paperwork and found out in November about the deficit.
All right, thank you very much. That does answer my question on when you've been doing that.
Yes.
I have a question. I'm looking at on my iPad your business profile, pathways, forensic and mental health. And Dr. Stanley, you say you're the owner director of Pathways Forensic and Mental Health Services. And you have another licensed sex offender treatment provider.
Yes, ma'am.
And along with licensed professional counselor. And you claim there that she's a forensic mental health professional whose practice centers primarily on providing specialized mental health and assessment services to clients associated with legal system, criminal and civil, and civil. Specifically, Dr. Stanley's practice involves application of psychological research, theory, and clinical practice to the legal criminal justice system. These cases may represent a wide spectrum of legal proceedings ranging from assessment or treatment of criminal offenders before or after federal or state prosecution. So it appears to me that you're doing pretty well with your other licenses in providing the services that you're giving. And you're in Nacogdoches. I don't say that very well. Is that the name of the city?
It is. You actually did very well, Nacogdoches.
Yes, and
Lufkin. Yeah, I practice in the Lufkin Nacogdoches area.
Yeah, and that's a what's the population of that area, that county?
I'm not sure exactly what the population is. I had that written down somewhere.
Just estimate.
50,000 maybe.
Okay, but
the whole area is a federally designated medically underserved area and a health professions shortage area. So they have to be under a certain population level. I'm Googling this answer to your question, Dr. Singh, right now.
Yeah.
I've spent a little bit of time out there, and it ain't Dallas Fort Worth. I love East Texas, but it's a lot more. Everyone's a little bit more dispersed as well.
Yes, I lived in Commerce, Texas, and I'm very familiar with East Texas area, and I am in rural area myself, in San Angelo and all that, and I'm very sympathetic to the some of the things that have been mentioned. But I'm just wondering that the kind of work you're doing, and I know of some other people that have the similar, with LPC, they're doing the similar stuff. It's not crucial that you have to have right away psychologist license. That's what I just wanted to mention, that I was thinking.
The population in 2019 of Angelina County, which is where Lufkin is located, was 86,715 people. For Google.
Very good. Thank you. I have just wanted to know, just wanted clarification.
Can I ask a brief question, Dr. Stanley?
Certainly.
One of the questions about this application was about your internship, and I know we're going back a decade here, so you can keep this brief. The questions on the application are really about making sure that the internship experience is as similar to an APA accredited experience as possible. So the things about having 2 interns and the supervisor being on site, it's for clarity and to make it consistent.
Yes.
And so my question for you is if you could just speak for a moment about what your internship experience looked like, and perhaps specifically what your supervision experience looked like, so we could have a sense of what that educational experience actually was.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for asking that question. My internship was, I actually met with my supervisor sometimes twice a week. I took him, any work that I did, we staffed cases, some by phone, we did the in-person. There was another director that was the LPC that was mentioned, but I did, even when I did the testing, he was the one that taught me how to do that. It was, even though he was off-site, we utilized that amount of time as well as other times that it was training, but we logged what we needed to log, but any questions that I had, all of my cases were staffed with him, some by phone, some in person. even on the assessments, the the instruments, the case conceptualizations, all of that, and the case. I'm trying to remember. It's been so long ago. Whenever I would run into something, I would ask him, or even if I felt fairly certain, because my position has always been, if I'm in question about anything, I would rather consult and find out to get my path forward, and I would always do that. And so the supervision experience was, even though he wasn't on site, he was very, very involved. And there was nowhere where somebody could be on site. Even our mental health authority, they didn't have a psychologist on site, and everybody else was in private practice. And so as far as my supervision with him, he was very involved, and I was the question queen. And because I wanted to diversify, I could just stick with LPC stuff and the typical, the psychotherapy, the whatever, but it was always my goal to fully utilize what I could do within the scope of my license. But as in looking at shaping my professional knowledge as perhaps a psychologist in the future, I knew that it was a win-win for me, because in doing that internship, I didn't, I needed that for later. And so, I felt like I learned so much, and I was so careful about everything, and the investment. And even to this day, even before I applied for the license, the knowledge that I got. And and even at SFA, they used to have a clinical psychology program, but because of the lack of sites, they couldn't place their students, and so they didn't have it anymore. But he was the head of that back then, way back. And so I felt like I was getting good supervision. And and so I feel like I'm rambling. I'm sorry. I'm trying to answer your question. And
you did
Okay.
answer it. Just to be clear, you were doing primarily assessment though during your supervision, during your internship. It was assessment and therapy.
It was therapy. It was assessments. It was the group therapy. It was coordinating with other professionals. It was working with our mental health authority, and consulting with him whenever we would do case treatment planning, whenever we were looking at diagnostics, whenever we were just the whole gamut of all of it. And I never did anything outside of the umbrella, I guess, of his supervision. Anything like that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for asking.
Okay. Thank you for taking the time to answer those questions. Is there any more discussion among the board as we deliberate on how to proceed here?
John, when you started off saying about protecting the public, I have every confidence in this lady being able to work in the community. She's obviously demonstrated a long history of professional ethics. There hasn't been anything mentioned about any complaints against her, etc. I'm all for being open-minded. Perhaps what we could do in view of the circumstances and our long history of work, we're standing in the community. Those reference letters were excellent. Maybe we could come up with a shortened or abbreviated type of internship, something that would allow her to qualify in perhaps a shorter time.
Any other Any other thoughts?
Based on circumstances, sorry, do you mind? I think, you know, I don't know the history of giving waivers in this area, and I know rules are there for a reason. In a sense, it sounds like a lot of these factors were outside of her control. She was a student and relied on, shouldn't have to worry about those factors that have come to light and inconvenienced her at this point. And I feel for that. If the matter is about protecting the public, ultimately, we've heard good reason, good arguments about what went on. I think a waiver should be considered. That's what I'm saying. I think there's circumstances here. The rural areas, the lack of opportunities, some things have just been outside of our control.
Yeah, and that geographic thing, that's a nut that we've all been trying to crack across,
Right.
you know, underserved areas for at least my whole tenure on the board.
I wanted to add that being from rural area and seeing the need for you know, professionals when we don't have enough professionals, I think Dr. Stanley fulfills that need in her area. And also, you know, lot of the problems that happened with the interns and or how they do things is that they have poor guidance. Their supervisors are not guiding them appropriately, or somehow or the other they have not gotten the rules down right. And I have seen that happen before with my students. And I think it's not just the responsibility of course of the student to get I mean of the intern to get their placement and all that themselves at appropriate place, but the supervisors are also have to be held responsible. Evidently that supervisor wasn't paying attention to what she was needing and all that. So can the supervisor also be advised that is there any provision for supervisors to be provided with the guidelines from the board when they accept somebody as intern?
I would just want to add, I'm smiling because we've asked that question a number of other times in ISCs as well as in board meetings. So I want you to know how much that question is valued. And I have confidence in the person who actually comes as Dr. Stanley has today, that they will get the word out and that information will be provided for the benefit of future interns at different placements as well as in the community, even though it's not her responsibility. And my understanding is if there's no complaint against an actual supervisor, we're dealing with a complaint related to an application. But I just want to say I'm smiling because I am right there with you on that question. And I think it was a disservice, but I also know we have some limits about how to approach it from that part.
Yes.
But it is acknowledged.
Thank you.
I don't know who had their hand up first. Ron, you want to go real quick?
Dr. Calhoun has had her hand up. I'll let her go first.
Okay, Doctor, thank you. Thank you. Man of honor. Dr. Calhoun, go.
Area, and I think it's very unfortunate that Dr. Stanley did not have a contract with her supervisor, because typically I work with for example, Stephen F. Austin's sociology program, social welfare program, and any intern that I work with has a contract.
Right.
You know exactly what to complete. The other thing is, yes, Northeast Texas is considered to have the worst health outcomes in the entire state. And, but as far as psychology is concerned, we're really addressing that. And if you don't know it, we're getting a medical college. It's already in the works. We've gotten approval from the state legislature to move forward with that. And we also have a postdoc program that was started last year. and it now has 6 postdoc students in it. I employ one in my institution, and we have a psychology intern program at the University of Texas Health Science Center that I'm sure Dr. Stanley could get some internship training there and complete requirements. I just am a little bit concerned about persons not having the full scope of preparation and training for an area like psychology.
Thank you, Dr. Calhoun, and I'm glad that I get to go after you because I feel the same. I believe strongly that we have our training standards, the competencies that are set there, and my concern. There's 2 pieces that I'd like to talk about. One is my concern is waiving or allowing someone to move forward and not having met those, despite the circumstances and the issues that are there. It sets a precedence. And so then if we were just to say, she has great letters of recommendation, she's in an area of need, she wasn't advised correctly when she started her internship, she's stayed out of trouble since, so we're going to waive the requirement. What stops someone else in the future from doing the same thing? Why do we have these minimum standards, these requirements then, if we're allowing others to go there? I know she has great letters of recommendations. I've read them, very impressive, but I also want to say that's in line with her work as an LPC. She's been a psychological trainee. The postdoc work has only been since 2018, these last 2 years. So she's not, so she has an outstanding reputation, and I don't want to say anything against that. I commend her. Dr. Stanley has done a tremendous amount of good work, wonderful things, but that's based upon her, her LPC license and the work there, not her work as a psychologist or as a psychological trainee, a psychologist trainee, or as an intern. And so I think keeping that in mind, my concern is allowing those circumstances to then we say, well, she looks good, she sounds good, she's presented a good case, let's waive this, because then we open that door. Have these requirements. Why is there these minimum standards that were that we set there, and what stops anyone else from coming forward to the board in certain similar circumstances or different circumstances, but for the same thing, asking for a waiver? Protecting the public, those standards are set there. Following APA internship accreditation standards have been set. Those standards for accreditation has been set based upon research, by experience. There's constantly review of what are those minimum standards that are set in front of those APA accredited internships. And it's not just a decision of, well, I think it's good to have 2 interns in an internship site, or that the supervisor doesn't have to be on site half the time or less. It's based upon very well thought out, debated standards and criteria and experiences. And for us to then say, well, we're going to waive that, then I think it opens that door to allowing others to meet that. And I don't think we're serving the public. So my position on this is, I feel for Dr. Stanley and the misguidance that she's received and the errors that were presented to her. But I do see, I would like to see, can we come up with some way to rectify this, having her do another postdoc experience that has internship requirements, or meets those internship requirements of having 2 licensed psychologists supervising her, having another intern or another person in training at that site, and that her supervisor is on site. It sounds like she had a great experience with her supervisor, but again, if the supervisor isn't there, was on site less than half the time, were they actually seeing her work? How much did they supervise that? And so I have some concerns with saying that she's got great training and she's wonderful and everything when that hasn't been truly demonstrated other than what's been said and experiences based upon her work as an LPC. So that's where I stand. Is I don't see waiving it and allowing her to move forward, because I think that opened floodgates for others. If we can find an alternative, I'm very willing to consider that and would like to see if we can pursue that. Thank you.
And I see you have your hand up. What you got?
Yes. So, in terms of the precedent being set, I don't think that's an issue, because we're all here to judge any situation that comes before us. And every situation is different. And whenever that happens, we are all here to discuss the same issues. I don't think people might come and ask for one, but we are the judges whether that will happen. So it's, there are precedents, but this is a situation that likely may not occur again, or, but this person may try to come before us and we'll have to look at the evidence. But I don't think unless somebody intentionally tries to circumvent the rules to get this, I trust all of us in the same situation to not let, they can come and try, but the precedent is only allowed if we approve it. So I don't think that's a concern of mine. I mean, it just shows that kind of, this has been going back years for her. This is something that she had no awareness or no control over. So it's not a matter of, and I totally understand what you're saying about the internship factors that she did not receive that because of that. That totally makes sense to me. But in terms of worrying about the precedent of other people coming, I don't think that's an issue at all, in my opinion.
My concern is mainly the fact that I'm hearing about a lack of mental health providers to supervise. And with these rural areas, you end up with a lack of mental health providers begetting a greater lack of mental health providers. And for something that has this much time from education to now, when we get these application cases before us, I've seen everything from fudging to outright lying. This isn't one of those cases. And we've got to figure out those cases and these and distinguish between the two. I'm not sure what kind of guardrails we can put on in terms of making the exception if we are to make an exception. But I have concerns about, again, the geography involved, again, a lack of mental health providers begetting a greater lack of mental health providers. So we've been talking about, I think we've given this a whole lot of, oh, hang on, Patrick, what do you got?
I just want to add a small point, and not necessarily to advocate for one side or the other, but I want to just sort of make it clear that the rules, whether or not what the motion may or may not be, the rules don't necessarily allow for a waiver of certain requirements. There's not something that necessarily says we're just going to say you don't need this. The board can make a motion and say we think that she does meet the requirements or that she does not. But the one thing we want to make sure is that we're not necessarily waiving a legal requirement, because there's not specifically a rule that allows that, other than there is one for incomplete applications, but that deals more with disasters and things like that. So I just wanted to clarify that procedurally is probably the way that it should be gone about. And the other part to what some other people were talking about is in that rule 46311F, there's a licensure following respecialization, and that is sort of a provision that deals with people post that have particular issues that with licensure, that's another pathway after they've done things. I don't know that that's necessarily we want to do that. I'm just pointing that out there, but I just wanted to make it clear that we didn't want to disregard our rules, I guess.
Thank you very much.
So I just have a question. One of the directions we're taking right now is to talk about, okay, we see where the gap is. What could we be creative to require of her in order to close that gap at this point in time that doesn't create further barriers to services to people in her community? And no respect to the people in any small community in any state, including Texas, but she works with people that aren't particularly the first choice of a population that people want to work with. They're hard. And we just heard she works with the sex offender population. and the criminal population as well as in forensics. And so as part of what we need to do is look at, okay, as a board, what could we put in place and recommend to close the gap that we all acknowledge was there, we have concerns about, but what's one of the ways that she can overcome that would satisfy the board to continue to allow her to progress? Is that our conversation?
Is that a Patrick question?
Yeah.
It sounds like what you're wanting to do is implement what's in 46311F and say this is how you can use that to get licensed potentially. If you could make a motion and say we believe based on what she submitted she does meet the requirements of 46311 and just license her, or you could say no. The reason why I was brought to you is because when staff looked at it, we didn't think that it met it based on the application, but F to me has always been the pathway. Now, I will say one of the problems with F is I've had many conversations with the licensing manager that a lot of people will have issues trying to find a respecialization program that meets this. And so that's, Dr. Becker will probably talk a lot more about it. It's people will go looking, hunting for it and have a hard time finding it. I'm hoping now with more things online, maybe there is, but maybe there isn't. Okay, so
what is Dr.
So what I was going to point out is that I think that one of the challenges that Dr. Stanley may have is that this is a pre-doctoral internship and not a postdoctoral issue. So because she is 10 years post-graduation and not affiliated with any course of study or any university, having her redo an internship is really a challenge because it would require her to be in a course of study. So I think as a board, we might also need to think about how we could help her overcome that barrier. So I don't know if it's in our purview to think about a requirement of supervision or how to help her determine whether she is competent to this practice, or an alternative to determining whether she has met the competencies of an internship at this point of her study. Because I think the burden of redoing an internship could be extremely challenging given that she is no longer affiliated with a university or a course of study in any way.
If I could just throw out, I think we're looking at the supervision aspect of it, that somebody that can speak to her competencies and find a creative way.
Agreed.
Don't have to enroll at a university to be able to help close the gap we're all identifying. And so Mr. Hyde, you had said, I just, my comment was to the whole board, because I just want to make sure if we move in that direction, if there's anybody that wants to say something to stop us from moving in that direction, to talk about what we could have put in place to assist her to close that gap, to that it will need to be creative and it will need to be have some specifics so she has a clear understanding of the expectations of the board for what we would be asking for.
I'm going to go real quick. Ms. Dalrymple's had her hand raised. Can we click to her real quick? And I want to see if there's something quick that we need to know.
Dr. Fletcher got on that. I wanted to remind the board that we were talking about a pre-doctoral internship before she even graduated with her PhD, and that is just long over. We want to protect the public too. And what I'm trying to figure out is today, based on what did or didn't happen during a pre-doctoral internship 10 years ago, can anybody on the board really say that those deficits and that internship, based on how Dr. Stanley is today, the services that she's provided since she became provisionally licensed in 2018, I mean, does that really make her a threat to the public today? I don't think it does. But what I think doesn't matter. It's what you think that matters. Is the lack of having another intern, having her supervisor on site more than 20 hours, having more than 2 psychologists on site back in 2010 to 2011, did those absences mean that she is not able to practice psychology in a manner that protects the public today? That's what I'm asking.
Understood. I don't know where this leaves us, board. We've discussed this pretty well. I don't know if it's time to start making a motion and see what the will of the board is. Is there any other discussion? I don't want to jump anything if there's anything else we need to discuss here, though.
I would just like to suggest thinking about having some additional level of supervision, close supervision, for some point of time prior to approving this application. And Ms. Dalrymple, I think her point is well taken, but it was also that Dr. Stanley did not practice, did not present herself as and engage in psychological services until just recently, these last 2 years. And her practice has been as an LPC. So I think I don't want to come back and it's like, yes, her internship experience was 10 years ago, but she has, and so she hasn't quite demonstrated that she has met all the criteria that everyone else who has been licensed has met to this point. And I do think there still is a concern of protection of the public until we can have that demonstrated. And so I see if we could get some additional level of close supervision for some time period, I think that would be the direction I would like to see moving forward on this. The other piece is if this board, if someone came forward to this board and we denied them on this, there are alternatives. I believe Mr. Hyde, Mr. Bridges, if the board denies an application, someone can then take that further up. Is that correct? If it's been denied, and then use this as a case to demonstrate their case further on. So it's not just that we aren't the stopgap. We can attempt to stop people from doing this, but we do set a precedence by allowing individuals to move forward without meeting the criteria that we have in our regulations.
Is that a question? Did
yes,
they
for
can
Ms.
appeal
Callahan.
to SOA?
Okay.
So it can go to SOA, which then this new someone else would look at what we decided versus what the applicant has presented, and this can be cited as a case where we have allowed for this to move forward at an earlier time.
I think Dr. Calhoun had her hand raised.
Dr. Blanton mentioned that she was like 3 hours away when she was going through the intern training. She's now 67 miles away from a program, a psychology internship program that is supervised. And I do know that any intern moving through that program has to have a psychologist present when they're conducting any kind of counseling with a client. And so perhaps we could have her make contact with the person that runs that program is Dr. Crystal Frazier. Perhaps we could have her make contact with Dr. Crystal Frazier, and perhaps she could just complete the internship portion of the program, because there's been a span of time here, 10 years.
She indicated some areas where, as a PhD, she could accomplish that she can't accomplish now. So I would say that if we were going to proceed with the supervision, that we make the supervision contingent upon being supervised in areas that are not her previous work, the work that she's going to be doing, because that's where we expect her competency to be, the core evaluations and competency evaluations and things that are a lot more delicate and more advanced, so to speak. So if we had a supervision of those kind of things, it would almost complete the idea when Ron said that she has experience, but it's been as an LPC. If we supervise her work as a potential PhD, then we might cover the areas that we're concerned about.
Patrick, can you help us real quick? It sounds you've heard this and you know the rules here. Is there a mechanism that you see to make a motion to do some of these suggestions that you could help us with constraints or supervision?
I mean, Daryl, is that okay if it sounds like they want to potentially put in extra requirements for her to meet, to do some more supervised experience, and then she would be qualified for licensure, I guess, to meet, to correct any sort of deficits that we're having in it. The main thing here is her internship that she had 10 years ago. It didn't have 2 supervisors. It didn't have all of the supervision, those sorts of things. And there's not really a mechanism in the rules that allows for sort of a piecemeal, it's either it is or it isn't. The only other thing was in subsection F about the respecialization, that they could fix their internship issues afterwards. So
may I just restate, let's just restate the problem here. The problem is, make sure that I've not gotten this wrong. Number of supervisors 10 years ago, Patrick, is that what you just kind of described?
There was a minimum of 2, and she only had 2, I'm sorry, let's see, they needed to have 2 full-time. There wasn't 2 full-time psychologists on staff. There wasn't staff present for the minimum of 20 hours per week in the facility, and there wasn't at least 2 internship level, 2 full-time equivalent interns on site. Is that correct, John? I think those are the three issues with it. Yeah. And it was an internship done 10 years ago.
I'm just having a hard time denying an application based on, I understand the technical reasons of the rules and how technically this does not match. You know, with the geography and the constraints there, I'm having a real hard time denying this.
Daryl, would an eligibility order allow for us to do something to have her complete to get extra supervision?
Eligibility orders typically, well, they arise out of situations where someone has violated a rule, not where somebody is failing to meet eligibility criteria.
But we can, if we deem this path, deem that the hurdle has been cleared, the hurdle has been cleared?
Yes. Now, let me tell you the downside to that.
Please.
There is no mechanism for you to waive eligibility requirements in the rules unless her failure to meet those requirements was the result of the pandemic, if you will. Remember, we passed that rule a while back that said if you fail to get your, whatever the requirement is as a result of a governor declared disaster, then we can waive it in certain instances. That's not what we have here.
Yeah.
So you really don't have a mechanism to say, well, we're going to waive the requirement in this case. And I will say these were requirements I believe were in place 10 years ago. So, you know, it's not like we added them after the fact.
Right.
That being said, if the board says, thank you for your input, Mr. Spinks, Mr. Hyde, this is what we're voting, then that's the end of that. The only downside to that is every Tom, Dick, and Harry who doesn't meet that is then going to take up that same position, and you're going to have coming in here.
Right, I understand that.
And the other alternative, right, Daryl, is they could say, no, we do think she meets these requirements and approve her, even though we don't think that we presented it to them that they don't.
All right. I feel like everyone's had a chance to, there's been a lot of great discussion here and a lot of great input, and this is you can make great cases on one side or the other for this one. Unless there's further discussion, I think it's time to entertain a motion to take action on this item.
Well, I would be willing.
Don't everyone talk at once.
Well, I'll try.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Fletcher.
What about making a motion to put in place parameters of supervision that are not necessarily in a formal internship, but parameters of supervision that are appropriate for her training and that would close the gap? and then have a time period identified. Would that be helpful, or do we not agree that that's the direction we're going?
Can we do that? That's a question for Mr. Hyde. Can we do that? Or Mr. Spinks?
I think
Can't let Daryl get away.
I think our previous answer would have been no. No it's sort of a yes or no proposition, but
right.
You're the board and you can make you don't have to follow what we say. So
can I make a suggestion or a question? If we give some guidance to Dr. Stanley without taking any action on this at this point, some guidance that perhaps she engage in some additional supervision, and she has some certain things, and we kind of give some direction there, and then have her return to the board with her application for review at that point with this additional, that at that point the board may consider to approve that she has met all the requirements. Is that a possibility?
I'm okay with that.
Can I pop in response to, Mark Twain once said, all conflict is due to unmet expectations. And I believe already what I'm understanding is that, if the clearer we are of what the board expects for her to be able to move forward, I think that is in everybody's best interest. So we don't just kind of leave it up and present it as somewhat flexible. I think that there needs to be some real definitive expectations for her benefit, as well as the benefit of the board who may address this issue of her application later.
Oh, absolutely. I didn't mean to make a loose statement, but if we came up with certain expectations that we would have and give her that guidance, and then table her application, or allow her to reapply after, and if she chooses to do those things and come back towards the board, the expectation on the board side would be that we would look favorably that she has actually met those requirements, and would be then would reconsider whether or not she has met all the requirements for licensure and move forward from there. So it's not so much as us taking specific action, it's just we come up with a specific, very set level of guidelines, what we would think could get her to that point, and let her choose to do that if so. And then at that point, when it came back to the board, we would have more background and guidance that would then allow us to make a determination if she's met all the requirements.
Ron, it sounds like Ron, it sounds like you're unconvinced, and it sounds like if we move to table this for the moment and maybe took it up at the next meeting or at another time where the case is made of these expectations that are now met that we've enumerated here, that we would take up and vote on this application and make a decision at that time. Does that sound about right? What I don't want to get in I don't want to make a motion to set out additional rules or additional guidelines or anything else like that, but it sounds like we're on the knife's edge of deeming that she's met the requirements. We just need a little bit more to probably come to that conclusion. And so, go ahead.
I was going to say, let me ask you a question. Is this and I'm ignorant, is this a military applicant or military spouse by any chance? No.
No.
Okay. And the option for going the LPA route with eventual independent practice, that's not palatable?
Can I just ask, are we sure this is not a military spouse? I just don't know that. Are we sure?
I don't think so.
Candace got her hand raised. Ms. Dalrymple?
I don't believe Dr. Stanley is a military spouse.
Okay, thank you. So, Dr. Palomares, would you enumerate for us a couple things perhaps that you'd like to see? Or Dr. Fletcher, whoever.
Well, I guess I would like to confirm with Mr. Spinks and Mr. Hyde that if we were to table this application at this point, and in our conversation, we enumerate some very specific things, and then it came back to when it came back to the board with those expectations or those specific suggestions having been followed, that the board then can reconsider or consider at that point whether or not to approve the application. Is that sufficient? Is that an appropriate process, or is that a legal process that we can engage in?
It won't change the fact that she still doesn't meet the eligibility
That's right.
requirements.
We would
It
have to,
doesn't
we
change.
essentially have to deem it. We have to deem it, those requirements met.
The only thing I can see that y'all can do is you can table it. You can start rulemaking to change the requirements or create a mechanism, leave her application pending while that goes through. Once it's adopted, then we can push her on through. But you would have to identify what rules you wanted to, we would need to know like what rules we want to change so that this doesn't happen again. How do we set up a mechanism to keep this from happening again?
It also, I mean, if we can prevent this from happening again, it provides a pathway for people, you know, in this situation to actually practice. So, and that's probably a lot more work for the rules committee and staff, but it may not be a bad thing.
So I move to table this application.
It's been moved by Dr. Palomares to table the application.
I second it.
Second by Mr. Zaguris. It's been
Yes.
moved and seconded that we table it. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? And the application is tabled, and that is to take it. We may take it up at another meeting. We don't need to set that, correct, Mr. Hyde?
We will put it on the next agenda, and
Perfect.
and we'll provide, and Mr. Bridges will provide notice, right?
Very good.
To Dr.
All right.
Attorney for the next agenda.
I'm sure that's not the outcome Dr. Stanley and Ms. Dalrymple were looking for, but we're not done with this. So thank you for being here, and thank you for the discussion among the board. Moving on to
I have one more.
Yep. Yeah. No, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
The next one is Dr. Kelly. He was working as a professor of psychology, and his deficiency is 465.2 C3. He was only provided 1 hour a month and not 1 hour a week of psychological services. Now, I want to point out that to get this to the board, it was sort of a rush job. I didn't want him to have to wait 3 weeks. So Dr. Palomares has brought up a possible problem with him not being APIC certified. That documentation he did provide with his application, but it did not make it into the agenda. I have it. I can screen share it if people need to see it. Otherwise, I can email it. And otherwise, I had someone here contact APIC in order to confirm that the supervisor did have an APIC certification, and it was confirmed.
And real quick, do we need? We've been going hard on this for 2 hours. Do we need to take a 10-minute break before we get into this?
Please, sir.
Sorry. All right, let's take a 10-minute break. It is 12:15. We'll be back at 12:25 on the dot. See y'all in 10. All right, the time is 12:26, and we have a quorum present, and we're back. Mr. Bridges was laying out the next item. I think Dr. Palomares, did you have a question, or do you want to say something first, or do we want to let Mr. Bridges lay it out?
I'd follow up with the layout as well as having reviewed it through the applications committee.
Okay.
So specifically, with this case, with this applicant, Dr. Leslie Kelly, there were two specific components that were there. He did not, for his postdoc supervision, did not meet the weekly supervision requirements. He met only monthly. And second, he did not inform the clients of his supervisory status. And then there was another piece to it that the supervisor himself said that his supervision was not related to his employment or anything else, that it was outside the employment status. Specifically, Dr. Kelly has he has 5 requests of us. One is a request to use some of his previously submitted postdocs hours. Second is a request to use his recent past employment history as filling in for those postdoc hours. Third, he's requested to use some of his internship hours for his postdoc hours. And then fifth, he's requested to be allowed to continue to use his current application, so he won't have to submit a new application with the follow-up fees and costs that will be required in a new application. So those are the 5 specific requests for waivers that Dr. Kelly has made in his request for our review of his application.
Very good. Are they here, and it looks like they'd like to speak. Is that correct?
He said he would be present.
Mr. Kelly has his hand up. I can.
All right. Are there any questions of the board before we let them get started? Okay. And was it 10 minutes, Ms. Moore, that we allowed them as well?
Yes.
All right.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, I'm Dr. Leslie Kelly. Thank you for the time to speak here. I will try to be as brief as possible. I'll just say that when I finished my pre-doc internship in 2015, that I began looking for a postdoc supervisor. I was teaching full-time at that time, and I found a previous supervisor who was willing to do that supervision for me. So the issue of it not being in regard to employment was because I found a supervisor outside of the college I was working at the time. Also, in terms of not informing clients, that issue was because I was working with students. I wasn't actually seeing any clients at that time. So there was the issue of informed consent shouldn't be a problem in that regard, as far as I understand. The other issue is the weekly supervision. In that regard, I had read the rules at the time, and in 2015 to 2016, and I somewhere believed that I saw a rule that said that if it was teaching and you weren't seeing clients, that it was up to the discretion of the supervisor how frequently you met. I don't know if that changed and I can no longer find it, or if I just maybe misread the requirements for part-time supervision. It's possible that that was the case. Regardless, I'm not requesting that my hours be the 1750 requirement be reduced. What I'm requesting is that those hours be considered part-time that I acquired from 2015 to 2016. And as Dr. Palomares presented so well, that I just be able to continue under the current application. What I didn't have in here, the only other piece of the puzzle that's not in here is that I began a new position at the university in August, and so the opportunity arose. I was worried at that time that maybe the weekly supervision would be a problem, because I had found, well, there were a few different pieces of the puzzle. With the 2016 requirement for provisional training license, I didn't actually think those hours would count at all. But then in 2020, I found the 22 TAC 463.11.83 that said that prior to September 2016, they could count. And so that's what led me to apply. But I did have concerns about the weekly supervision. And so I have, when the opportunity arose to continue supervision in August, I have started that at that time. And so I have collected hours since then as well. And that's in the amount of 680 hours. So between my pre-doctoral internship hours being in excess and the maybe partial hours from my original supervision, postdoctoral supervision, and then these new hours, I'm hoping, if I'm not deemed to meet the requirement, that I'll at least be able to continue my under the current application and collect the remaining hours. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Discussion amongst the board. Ron, is there anything you'd like to follow that with? Or is there anybody else who'd like to speak on that?
Well, I do have a question. When I was, and this is a side, not related to this piece to it, when I was reviewing his application, I noticed that he had indicated that he had gone to an APA accredited internship, and that internship, and I wasn't familiar. It was in the local area where I live. I wasn't familiar with it being that there was an APA accredited internship there, and so I had a question about that. And so I know Mr. Bridges has followed up on that. Can you share with us? Did he was his internship an APA accredited internship?
It was APIC, and I have a document I can screen share here, which was included with his original. Let's see now if it'll let me.
John, there's no unredacted information on that document you're about to screen share, is
Let
it?
me check that real quick. That is a good point.
Thank you, Mr. Spinks.
Have I taken off screen share? Let's see. Address, email address.
And so while Mr. Bridges is looking at that, I think with the application, and I'm going to defer to Mr. Spinks and Mr. Hyde. Are you familiar with previous rules that said that if you were being supervised in a university setting that you were allowed for 1 month? My understanding that it's been consistent. It's always been for all postdoc was weekly supervision. But can you clarify that for us?
That rule's not ringing a bell with me. I don't recall that ever being in a rule. Brenda, can you pull up that old psych board policy on teaching and see if it said? I don't even think it said anything like that in it.
Let me look. Hold on.
The only thing I could think of is the 465-2 supervision rule talking about 1 hour supervision, but that's not dealing with interns that I can think of. Those are for PLPs.
And this was his PLP position. This is the postdoc during his PLP, but is it weekly or is it monthly?
It's always been weekly.
Weekly.
Yeah, we've never used the monthly standard.
And that's my understanding as well. And so here then with basically everything here is that he did his postdoc hours did not meet that supervision requirement. But I'm glad to hear Dr. Kelly is currently undergoing the supervision for his at this time with weekly meetings. So that sounds like it's occurring at this point. And so one of the questions then is that we could look to move this to table this application and allow this for him to complete that, and then for us to act at that point. But then I'm not sure what the other positions are on whether we can table it or do we deny it at this point and allow him to reapply, and there's some additional costs there and so on.
It is Dr. Kelly, I guess, is he a provisional licensee right now? Is that what he is? Or his provisional status? I see a provisional licensee. John, Patrick.
Let me look it up real fast. He said he was LPA. He said he was currently under an LPA.
I'm a PLP, so provisionally licensed psychologist. It's
okay.
Yeah.
So when was that issued, Doc?
I'll have to pull it up real quick. Excuse me.
I think September of 2020. Is that, if I'm reading this right?
Okay, so you still got another year on that. The reason I bring that up is we can't extend an application out. I mean, once that 2 years is up, that application will expire if you haven't met the licensing criteria by then. We can't extend that. And then when he reapplies, now any hours he acquired previously, he could obviously count. We don't wipe those out. You could count them, but we can't issue another provisional status to him after that, because we set it up that way so people wouldn't game the system and just always be provisionals. He would have to be working in an exempt setting, or he'd have to go get his LPA and work under that. There's mechanisms to still get it, but you just wouldn't be a provisional licensee. But I just want to make sure everybody's clear. We can't really extend that application date. So if he can't get all the hours by the end of that provisional, his application will expire, and then he would have to reapply.
So we can, at this point, we can table this, allow him, and he has 2 years from last September when his PLP was issued.
Correct.
If he can get the appropriate hours with the correct supervision within this time frame, then this application is still open, and he can submit those hours, and at that point it can move forward.
Correct.
If he fails to get those hours within these 2 years from last September, then he will have to submit a whole new application.
Correct. Now, one thing he also, I don't know if he knows he can maybe take advantage of, or see if he can, is, we added that rule after sunset. We added that rule that says you can count any excess internship hours towards your postdoc requirement. If he came from an APIC, I'm trying to think, do we allow for APIC in that rule?
Daryl,
Yeah.
on the teaching policy, it
Mhm.
says, for the purpose of Board Rule 46311, supervised experience teaching is not acceptable as fulfilling the formal year. However, teaching is acceptable for the postdoctoral year. Teaching may involve either graduate level or undergraduate level courses.
Right, but he would still have to meet the supervision, which is at least 1 hour a week of, he would still have to be under at least 1 hour a week of supervision, rather than just 1 hour a month. So that's
You
why
had just
that's
wanted
not.
to know what it said.
Yeah, okay.
Can I ask a question? Can Dr. Kelly count the hours of the week that he met, even though that once a month he met, that week that he met, can he get the credit for that?
I believe you have to have all the hours within a 2-year period.
Mm-hmm.
So in doing that, and because it was a while ago, if he counted those hours for each of those weeks, he would not meet the total hours within a 2-year period.
How many internship hours? He came from an APIC internship?
He has 508 additional hours. So it's 2,008 or 2,080 hours. His internship was 2,308 hours.
Somebody do the math. What's the excess then on that? 2,000.
So it's 808 hours
over and above
beyond the 1,500.
No, it's 1,750.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So it's 508 out.
So you got
No, that's not
500.
right. 1,750.
Are we looking that up, or are we?
So it's 558 out. 558 hours.
Excess hours.
Is
Okay.
excess.
Okay, so
558.
So he can apply those towards his postdoc if y'all consider an APIC an APIC internship to be substantially equivalent to an APA.
So that would require him to have 1,250 hours in this 2 years of supervised experience with 1 hour a week supervision.
Correct. That's, yeah, if we count those excess APIC internship hours, he only needs the 1,200 and change, whatever that is.
So does he have time within this application time to complete those 1,200 plus hours?
He's now got a little under a year to complete it.
And Dr. Kelly, I know that you're still with us. Could you tell us, you said you had 600 hours already, is that correct?
Yes, I have 680 hours from August till now, and then we, in terms of the original hours in 2015, 2016, I did under the third point request the waiver from 22 TAC 46311 C2BI or I that basically said proof of employment in an exempt setting. Between, you can count hours for over 2 years. And so I provided loan forgiveness forms that showed that I was employed in education from that time. So that was, you know, after I was looking at this more closely, that was the one thing that I found that would allow me to keep at least some of those hours. And of course, it's up to the board whether or not I can keep a portion of those or not. But the math I've done, if I kept a quarter of those hours, I'm setting at just about 1,730 hours. So if this was at the next board meeting, I would have been over that.
Hold on just a second, Doc. That provision you're looking at is a waiver for a gap.
Yes.
That's, and we're not saying you have a gap. Are we, John? The issue here is not a gap. Okay, so that waiver is not applicable.
Oh, what's a gap then?
Well, the gap, when you look at that rule, what we're talking about there is a gap between the date your doctoral degree is conferred and the date of application. You don't have a gap of more than 7 years. So that wasn't an issue for us. And
oh, I thought that was the two. If there were if that was about a 2-year gap between one supervision and the second supervision.
No,
that's the way I read that rule.
Yeah, no, that's not what it is.
Okay.
So I mean, you know, that one won't help you out, I'm afraid. But it sounds like between, you've got 500 hours and some change from your internship. You've already done 600 hours and some change since August. So we're looking at you've got roughly 1,200 hours. It sounds like already in your pocket. You need another, what, 500, 600?
Can I ask something? I might be missing some documents, but do we have that same checklist about Dr. Kelly's internship requirements and whether it had all of those requirements that we have for non-APA accredited sites, like whether he was getting supervision 1 hour a week, if there was a supervisor on site 20 hours a week, there's more than one intern? Because I don't seem to have that page in my documents.
I doubt, Dr. Becker, because I mean, unless somebody else had brought that up, that was just something I was thinking here off the cuff, trying to figure out a way.
Because if that's new information that it's an APIC site, but not necessarily an APA or CPA accredited site, those are two very different things.
And that was my question. So separate from the other part of his hours, that's my question that I had raised, that I just found yesterday and raised this morning, is that he's indicated on his application that we have in our book on page, sorry, what page it is on, that he completed an APA accredited internship. And I looked at the sites, the Sante Center for Healing in Argyle, Texas. which is near Denton, and I was not familiar with it being an APA accredited. I looked at their website and they do not indicate that they were an APA accredited internship site. So I have a question about that piece, and that was where I was asking Mr. Bridges to share with us that component, because according to the application that we have, it indicates that that he says, yes, he did go to an APA or an APIC site, and I was not familiar with that being one, so I wanted to confirm that that indeed was an APIC site. So Mr. Bridges, do you have that information?
I do. I looked it over. It doesn't appear to have any information. So let me screen share and see if I can get this up. Is it showing?
No, sir.
No.
No. Someone help me with this technology then again, please. Oh, I have to, we've got too many screens here. Is this it? Y'all see it?
There we go. Yes, sir.
Do I need to scroll down?
Can you enlarge the document?
It moves it over. Does that make it easier? At a certain point, if you enlarge it on my screen, it seems to take it off screen and I'm unsure. Oh, wait.
Do you have multiple screens? Because we're looking at an application. It may be, if you have multiple screens, you may be sharing a different screen.
I thought I chose the right one. Let me go.
So just to be clear, this may need to be clarified, but the question, there are two different questions. So the question is APA or CPA accredited or a member of APIC. And being a member of APIC does not make you APA or CPA accredited, which would meet those criteria that we're talking about for internship, but that is the way that the question is asked. But you're saying this program is not an APIC either, right?
I am not familiar with it being an APIC, and so that's my question.
Okay.
Whether or not it is APIC.
It was, I don't know if I can be heard, but it was APIC accredited at that time.
Dr. Kelly, was your degree program APA accredited? Not the internship, but the degree program.
Yes, it was.
Because I think I made a mistake earlier, board members, when I was talking about the APIC status of the internship. When you look at 46311 B1, it talks about APA accreditation of the degree program, and it's not the internship. So that's an important distinction I screwed up earlier. If he comes from an APA accredited degree program, then he can use hours in the excess hours over and above 1750 from the internship toward his postdoc.
Coming from an APIC, is that also allowed?
No, it doesn't say that in here, but you know, you could, if y'all found that an APIC member program is substantially equivalent to an APA accredited, that doesn't mean they have to be exactly the same. Substantial equivalency is not exact sameness. It's just substantial equivalency to it. If y'all found that, then you could allow that as well.
So what we're talking about here basically is that Dr. Kelly did not meet the postdoc supervision requirements that are listed in his application. He has currently been given has his PLP that was provided to him in August of last year. And he is in the process of getting that supervision. He's already gained 680 hours of supervised experience, and he needs a total of 1750 hours for that postdoc supervision, which he has 2 years to do that in. At this point in time, it's approximately 1.5 years to get that full 1750. If he's able to get that full 1750 of supervised postdoc supervision hours, this application can be, he can submit those to this application process, and it can be moved forward. And if he's met those at that point, then he's met all the criteria and there shouldn't be an issue. So that's where we are at this moment, is to determine, do we, how I interpret it is, would we like him to continue his current movement towards his postdoc supervised hours, and have him submit those under this application within this 2-year period? Or would we like to consider some options for waiving some of those out, or not waiving, using some hours in other places that from what he's gathered, such as the excess hours from his internship, to reduce that 1750 down at this point. So I guess there's 2 directions that we can go. Is we can say, we'd like to go ahead and table this application and allow him to finish his supervised experience and submit those. Or we can go in the direction of talking about looking at his internship hours to see if we'd like to waive, to include some of those in that postdoc hours. So I would like to know where, I guess at this point, I'll ask what other members of the board would like to do.
Is there further, if there's not a whole lot of discussion, Ron, it looks like you laid out a couple of ideas that could be a motion.
So I would move that we allow Dr. Kelly to continue his current supervision for his postdoc hours, and when he reaches the 1750 hours, submit that documentation to the board under this license, and have it be reviewed, and at that point his application acted on.
Okay, so it's been moved to continue his supervision to get to his postdoc hours to 1750. Am I stating that correctly? Is there a second?
I'll second it.
It's been moved by Dr. Palomares, seconded by Mr. Zaguris. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I can't hear you guys. Okay. All opposed, say no. And the motion carries. Unopposed. All right. Thank you, everybody, for your attention to that. That brings us to, we had compliance. Is that correct? Compliance.
Yes.
Mr. Adler.
No issues. Everything's up to speed. Everything's good.
Very good. Jurisprudence. Dr. Fletcher.
Nothing to report.
Love it. We're flying. Okay, that brings us to rules. We have a couple of rules that are being considered for proposal. We can start with 463.9, LSSP repeal trainee status language. I'm going to pull that up on my screen here. All right, so this is, do our attorneys want to chime in on this? Patrick, do you want to, this is essentially getting rid, we've got some obsolescence in the rules that we're fixing. Do you want to expound on that, Patrick, for us real quick?
Yeah, sure. So where people used to get pre-approved for the jurisprudence exam, and while they're pre-approved and sitting, studying, and then before taking it, they would get this trainee status. Now they have to, it's the reverse. Now they have to take the jurisprudence exam, pass it, and then they get issued the license. This trainee status doesn't exist. It can't exist anymore. So the database won't create it anymore, and so there's not a way to actually even get a trainee status. So that's why it's being proposed to be cut out of the rules.
All right. So is there any? This is pretty vanilla here. Is there any discussion? If not, I would entertain a motion to propose it.
Oh, the one other, sorry, John, that I'll add is I've made a note to make sure that if we adopt this rule, that we're not going to do it past September 1st of this year. That way there won't be any people that currently have a trainee status. We stopped being able to do this a while back. And so those will all fade out by September 1, which that currently hold it. So I would say go forward with this because we still have to send it to the council. They have to propose it. It has to go out for publication, then come back before it can get adopted. So I doubt that'll happen before September 1, but just a little asterisk, we won't adopt this till after September 1.
The earliest effective date would be September 1st of 2021.
Yeah.
Fair enough. All right. So do I hear a motion to propose this?
I'll make the motion to propose it.
It's been moved by Dr. Fletcher that we propose this rule.
I second.
Seconded by Mr. Adler. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it, and we are proposing 463.9. Moving on to 465.2. This is, Patrick, correct me if I'm wrong, this is just more of the same, clean up administrative stuff to get rid of this obsolescence?
Correct. You're right. There's the listing of the trainee in 465.2, and so we would be taking that out. And there's a highlighted section in there as well in A7. That's just to illustrate that currently doesn't exist in the rule, but it's currently been proposed to be changed. It was the proposal that went out just recently. So that's why it's highlighted, to show if you look at the rule right now and it doesn't exist because it's being proposed.
Fair enough. Any questions or discussion? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to propose this.
I'll make a motion.
Moved by Mr. Bridges.
Seconded.
Seconded by Mr. Adler. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Say no. No opposed. The ayes have it. We are proposing 465.2. Moving on to 465.38. I would direct you, we had one comment on this, which was in your packet. Patrick, will you, I don't see any comments on this one on the actual, the rule document. Can you help us out here and explain this one to us?
So the rule, I think in subsection E for 465.38, that was kind of duplicative and confusing, I think, Daryl, is one of the reasons why we looked at kind of changing this up and making sure that this is more accurate. And so it's kind of, there's the E1B, there's an either or option to look at because the way it was previously written, it obviously needs a little bit of a cleanup because the rules have changed a little bit, and it didn't really flow or make sense. This is a clarification sort of.
So we need to adopt one of these Bs, is that correct?
Correct. We would not want both.
So what, I'm trying to understand the pros cons here of each of these. I mean, is the second B, is that broader?
Here's the issue. This is something that came up that the governor's office had identified when they were looking over our rules. The original wording, which has been struck through there, just references it references the rule, and it talks about it says the individuals listed in 463.11. 463.11 is a very long rule, and it has provisions in it that talk about if you're an LPA, you can use that title while undergoing your postdoc supervision. I think that's allowed for like billing purposes or what have you. I mean, you're an LPA, you're still under supervision. What does it matter if you're called a postdoc or an LPA? The substance of it doesn't matter. So I think what the governor's office was like, one of the things they were looking at is like, why are you making it so complicated? Why don't you just say, if it's interns or postdoc fellows, then just say that. We're trying to, I don't know. I don't know how to explain this any better. It's meant to get away from the confusion of not listing or not identifying the specific individuals that are operating under 463.11. And I don't know that it, anyway, I'm doing a terrible job of explaining this.
So
I'll just shut up.
The first B simply, it's, I think I said it wrong. The first B seems more broad and more just layman terms. If you're working towards interns and postdoc fellows working towards licensure.
And that's who is under 463.11. I mean, that's what 463.11 is. It covers interns and it covers postdoc fellows. And it's just a very straightforward, simple explanation. Whereas 463.11, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, keep going.
I was just going to say, whereas the previous explanation, it just implied it was interns and postdoc fellows, but it left some room for confusion because that rule also mentions LSSPs, LPAs. And so I think the governor's office was just concerned. They were like, look, y'all, you're overthinking it. Basically, who is it that rule focuses on? Then you just need to mention those individuals.
So the first B for my brain requires less thinking.
I think so.
Okay.
Really quickly, as a non-LSSP, are there any other circumstances that there would be individuals with provisional status or any other reason who would be in the schools that aren't interns or fellows, that aren't working towards an LSSP degree? That would be my only other question.
I think the reason LSSPs are mentioned in 463.11 is because there is a pathway to complete your internship in the public school system.
Right.
And I think if you're also an LSSP, then we would allow you to use that title while you're doing that internship, if memory serves me correctly. Other than that, no, there shouldn't be anybody practicing. You're either going to be an LSSP or you're going to be one of these interns. That's the only way you ought to be in the public school.
So there are no other people who would need this.
Right. The only other, and this is kind of a weird, quirky area, the only other way that a non-LSSP can be in a school system, public school system, is if that school system contracts with the individual to deliver some service that the school can't. But that's a very limited basis. It's not meant to, you can't contract with, say, a psychologist or an LPA to come in and do what an LSSP does. It's just, if I need a neuropsych eval, I can go contract with Dr. Rosenstein and get her to come in and do it. It's not meant for broad-based school services.
And that's actually listed right below that in paragraph 2.
Yeah, there we go. Ron, you should have just said, shut up, Daryl, it's in 2.
So I would make the motion that the first B be adopted.
I second it.
And it's been moved by Dr. Fletcher, seconded by Dr. Palomares, that we adopt we propose the rule with the first B option. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed say no. And the ayes have it. And we are proposing this rule 465.38 with the first option, the first B. All right. Thank you guys for the attention on the rules. We have nothing awaiting adoption at this time, so just the proposals. I don't see any old business. All right, moving on to new business. Number 1 is election of the vice chair. So I would open the floor right now. Dr. Palomares is our current vice chair. I would open the floor to nominations for our vice chair.
I would like to renominate Dr. Palomares for that position.
It has been moved by Dr. Fletcher. Is there a second?
I'd like to second it.
Everyone's racing for it. I think Mr. Bridges got to it first. It's been moved and seconded to re-elect our current vice chair to another term as vice chair. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Ron, congratulations. Appreciate your service as vice chair, and it looks like you obviously have the strong support of your board.
Thank you, everyone.
Establish a schedule for reviewing committee assignments. We're on the agenda is either a 2 or 3 year. I think I'd like to keep it at a 2 year, unless anybody has any other reasons why it should be a 3. Everybody does not necessarily have a committee assignment. We have a couple of new board members. I would like for the way that I would hope that the board assignments will work is that when we, and it's worked really well today, when we come to the agenda item, chime in and kind of drive the bus for that agenda item. So is there any discussion on 2 or 3 year terms, pros, cons, merits, or of each? I don't think I need an action item on that, do I, Daryl, or on if it's 2 or 3, or do we have to vote on that?
You know, I don't know that we ever formally adopted the 1 year requirement. All I know in my interim as the ED for y'all, it became rather annoying because it always felt like committee reassignments was just always coming up. So at a minimum, right, you know, I would ask y'all to make it 2 so you don't drive Diane crazy and she leaves us. But is it anything where, I mean, if somebody doesn't like where they are and wants to do something different as we, you know, again, we have 3 new board members as they grow in their expertise or see something that they want to do. Is there any big issue in terms of if I reassigned that midterm at all, or? No, because you're assigning them as the chair, so you can pull them out, place them, move them, however you want to. Okay, so I'm just going to plan on 2 years, and I don't plan on really doing a whole lot of hiring and firing off different committees unless there's a reason to or somebody wants to. We'll just go with that. I will email these out and make sure that they get in writing somewhere. So I'll just go ahead and announce how I've appointed it. For applications committee, we're going to go Mr. Adler and Dr. Palomares. For compliance, Dr. Fletcher, Dr. Singh. Jurisprudence, Dr. Fletcher. Rules, I'm going to go with Dr. Palomares, Dr. Becker, and Dr. Calhoun. And personnel, Mr. Bridges. So not everybody has a committee. If you want one, or feel free to let me know, and I'll find work for you. But I appreciate everybody's willingness to step up and to lead on these boards or committees. The only thing I would add, Mr. Chair, is we actually don't have a personnel committee any longer since the personnel now belong to the council. And Brian, you've been fired. I'm sorry.
That was quick.
Thank you, Mr. Spinks. Brian, if you want some more work, I'll find something for you to do.
We'll figure it out.
I know. Okay. What was our next thing? I just lost my spot. Okay, this is actually I know we're kind of getting, well, we're not even mid-afternoon yet, but I hope we can talk about this expeditiously. Discussion on whether to transition from written minutes to audio-visual. I'm going to just start off by saying that I appreciate written minutes. They're nice to go back to and look at. I don't think a whole lot of people go back to them. When I've had to go back and look at other public meetings, there's been a handful of different things I've seen where, especially if it's tabbed to a specific item, or you can click on it to that part of the meeting and just go see what they said. It was a lot easier for me as a member of the public to go see what, you know, a certain agency or board did at a meeting. Frankly, I mean, when you look at the legislature and what they do, they archive all of the videos from all the different, you know, committee meetings all the way down to the floor proceedings. If they're all doing it, I don't really have a problem with us doing it too. I know the creation of the written minutes create a whole lot of extra work for the staff. We're being asked to do more with less, and so that would be my lead off to my thoughts on it. But I would welcome disagreement and argument with me for why we should do something different if anyone has any thoughts. So I'll go ahead and open the floor to that.
You know, it's better to have recorded meetings than just the written minutes, because I've seen many times, not just few times, many times, people have made mistake in the transcribing of the what went on, and so there is less chance of mistakes when you're recording it and you have a meeting right there to prove what was done, what was not done.
Yep. I don't disagree with any of that.
I agree with that, and I really believe that the only real way to have written minutes that are totally accurate is to have a stenographer on and doing it the right way. Because if you don't have a stenographer, you're going to miss a lot of stuff.
Daryl, what do you think the legislature would say if we asked them for more budget for a stenographer right now?
Big old fat no.
Very good. That's what I figured. Any other discussion? There seems to be some consensus on this, so without objection, I would say let's move and move to not written minutes, and we'll keep the audio recordings. And Mr. Hyde and Mr. Spinks, we have all the procedures in place to make sure that those are accessible.
Yes, sir. We'll also maintain video, and for those of you on the council, you got an email from me last night. I've now figured out how to use Zoom's closed caption and transcript creation, so we can create transcripts of the meetings that are linked to the times in the meeting. So we can fix it up so that there is both a written record of what is said and then an audio and a video recording as well.
Very good. Mr. Adler, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to say this means no knock against Brenda, right? Let's just make it clear. This is not anything regarding about her performance verbally transcribed, right?
That's right.
I just want to make sure that's clear, right?
We're just trying to make her life everyone's
I'm just asking why it wasn't done so many years ago.
Oh, well. Sorry.
Okay. Win some, you lose some.
Yeah. All right. So very good. Thank you guys for that. Discussion on future board meetings, virtual, in person, or a combination. Zoom has made life sure interesting. It's enabled us to manage processes and people far differently than we have in the past. It's challenged us in ways that are new, like kitten filters, perhaps. Thankfully, we haven't seen that here. I don't know, it's not obvious. I'll say it. I want to get back to meetings in person. It was really good to have us all in the same room and seeing each other's faces, being able to, have the members of the public sit there and look us in the face and tell us what they think. That said, Zoom has also opened this process in a way that makes it accessible to people who may not have made the trek to Austin. So I think that both have merits. I think both may have a place, but I would love to hear what you guys think about, when do we go back to in-person meetings? What does that look like? Do we keep Zoom as part of the rotation? So really would love to hear the thoughts.
Well, on a personal side for me, I would say this is much less disruptive to my personal life and my professional life. I'm not self-employed, so while I work for a company, usually it means PTO or time with no pay in a way, kind of driving time. So in that sense, it makes me more available. It makes me less impact on my professional life and my work and losing money and PTO, stuff like that. So that's been a benefit for me that cannot be ignored personally.
Yep. I am self-employed, and you're not alone in it being destructive to schedules and productivity. Right. So I share your sentiment in that regard.
Well, my main point is I love to see people. I love lunching around with them, talking with them, and all that. But as long as the pandemic is there, the virus is not under control, and there are some of us over 65, and I think Zoom is the safest way to go.
The state government, I believe Abbott put something out where he realized that he's saving a lot of money not having people travel into Austin and have meetings and this and that and the other.
Yeah, it's not cheap for the state to have I mean, when you I don't know how many boards there are, but there's a lot. And yeah, it definitely saves the state money, which frankly, this year, with the state budget being what it is, I'm sure they're not upset about us not getting together in person. Well, it sounds like there's general consensus, at least for the next meeting, maybe the next two, that we're going to probably continue via Zoom. I'm going to be keeping a close eye on kind of when we can, I want to get back together. So let's, I guess, keep an eye on things and maybe revisit it next board meeting and see where we go from there.
I would add, Mr. Chair, that the two are not mutually exclusive. In other words, we could set it up if some of you wanted to come to Austin for the meeting and the rest wanted to appear via Zoom. I think we can do that now.
Okay.
The problem with it is we have a boardroom here in the office where I am in this tower. I don't have the table. You may all be sitting around a folding table on some chairs that might not be of the most comfortable. But like the camera I'm using, we've got the speakers and the microphones. We went ahead, Brenda and I went ahead and bought the stuff needed to do a meeting like that. I just don't have the fancy office furniture, because if we're moving in another year, we were kind of waiting to see what that conference room looked like in our new building before we bought a table. I didn't want to buy an 18-foot long table and have a 16-foot room.
Right.
So I'm just telling y'all, it is doable. They're not mutually exclusive. We could mix it, but if you want to go that route, give me some time to get you something to sit on and work on.
I'd like to, personally, I'd like to see at least one cycle or one quarter. If we're setting it for next quarter, I'd like to have one quarter in the rear view of COVID and whatnot, getting to a better place before we start probably getting back together for everybody's safety, including the public.
I was just going to mention that as well, to Dr. Singh's point, that we're still currently under CDC guidelines to not have groups of more than 10 in place for meetings. So that might limit a government meeting of more than 10 people. So we might not, I expect that things would change in a few months, but you kind of have to be careful of that too.
Yeah.
I would like to say moving.
I want to speak for those self-employed members and those that cannot get away as easily. That there are hybrid type meetings are pretty good, and you can easily do that, where those who want to travel and can be there in person, and then that group will be on one picture of Zoom, and the other people can just come in through Zoom. And that will save some money to the state. And also it will create maybe better attendance in case some people have to sometimes not come because of certain, other reasons. And so I think hybrid meetings are already going on with some places. And we do it at the universities all the time. And I think that's something we could consider that in the near future.
Very good. Thank you. Dr. Palomares.
And that was the same thing. As we move forward, I would like to see possibly a combination of in-person and online with staff. With some of us being one or the other. That was all. Thank you.
I like it. Very good. All right, so there's some consensus.
Can I add one more thing? Is that
yes, please.
We're going to learn from other systems and organizations too about what works. In October, testified in a trial locally in person where many of the other people testified by video. And that wasn't the barrier to issues. The barrier was all the plexiglass around us, and we were wearing masks, so it was really hard to hear each other. And yet it was surprisingly a very easy way to have access to people for the purpose of a court proceeding. And I felt that it was very productive. I don't know, you can ask the judge about his opinion, but as somebody testifying in person and needing to observe and hear the testimony of other people in person as well as through video, it was very, very helpful. So I think we're going to watch what other organizations are doing, other boards are doing, and we're going to learn from them about what makes the most sense. But I just want to reiterate, John, what you're saying. Especially with new board members, I really appreciate when we go off the record and we're taking bathroom breaks or we're grabbing lunch or whatever, or even before meetings start, to know each of you. And I think that helps us in terms of our functioning, because we do have a reputation, I believe, as a board that functions very well, disagrees in a very healthy manner. And I think part of it is because we're in each other's presence. We get to know each other. We know strengths or weaknesses. We appreciate differences. And I think we do a better job of that when we've been able to have some time together in person.
Yep, I agree.
If I can make one comment about the blended meeting aspect of it too. I just want to underscore the idea that during the pandemic, we've had, or the public has had unprecedented access to our meetings without having to come to Austin. There hasn't been that barrier for them. So I think even if all of us are sitting in the same room, still having the meetings open for Zoom for public comment, I think would be healthy and would continue to, I guess, eliminate some of those barriers to access for the general public. So just a thought.
I like it. That's a very good thought. Daryl, there's no issue. There's no like technological barrier with that, is there? You just put a Zoom up at the end of the desk or something, or at the end of the table.
Yeah, we would just use this camera, which is kind of a fisheye camera.
Yeah.
And then I've got a microphone that would set in the middle of the table that should pick up all your voices, and it serves as a speaker as well, of course.
Cool.
Yeah, I think we can do it. It's just I wouldn't have a camera in each of your individual faces. I'm not going to have that capability.
Right.
It's just going to be one camera looking down the table.
Cool. Brian, thank you. That's a good thought that hadn't been yet discussed. That brings us to, we're getting close. Review of draft TSBEP, social media use and electronic communication guidelines. This is guidelines. I mean, it would not have the effect of rules, but Patrick, is this essentially a safe harbor? If you follow these things, we're probably not coming for you, kind of thing? Patrick or Daryl, is that a fair assessment of this, the social media guidelines?
Daryl, I didn't draft this. Was this one that you drafted?
This is, I think, one that Dr. Palomares and I worked on together. ASPPB had published the original draft guidelines. I'd mentioned it at some board meeting in the past, and a lot of the board was like, well, it may be a little too over the top for our taste. And so we kind of pared it down into this. These are just guidelines. They're not rules. So if somebody doesn't follow them, it's not like we can't open a complaint. It's just a matter of, if you follow these will probably keep you out of trouble, is really what it is.
How are these, if we adopt these, how are these published?
On the website.
Okay. Since this is the first time that we've all seen this as a board, is this something that would it be to leave them up till the next board meeting and maybe adopt them then, and essentially like treat it through the same timeline as an actual like proposed rule?
What I would recommend, rather than adopting them without the public seeing them yet, is if y'all are okay with that draft, then let's put it on the website, solicit public comment on them, and let's see what people think. We'll get TPAs, TAPAs, and TAFs feedback on it, and then we'll bring that back to you once the comment period. It's kind of an informal comment period is what we can do.
Right. Essentially put it through the same calendar as a rule, but not with the force.
And actually that was the motion from, or that was the intent from our last meeting, was to draft these and then to have them where the board takes a look at them, but then also make sure that we get public input and share it with them before we do anything with them. So that was the expectations. Once we had a chance to look at them as a board and agree with them, then move them out for public comment before we certify them in some fashion.
Okay, so
I'm looking
without
at this
objection,
now.
go ahead.
Can I say something? Look at these now. I mean, these are all common sense things. I mean, like, it's good to write them down, but not everything one of these makes sense. Like, you know, in terms of everything like the relationships and, you know, confidentiality. So, I mean, of course, invite the public, but I think from, you know, face value, it looks really good. It's important.
Very good. Thanks for the work that went into this. So without objection, let's go ahead and get this out into the wild. And we're open to comments, feedback, improvements, and critiques from the public and stakeholders. And we'll take
a question. Will
yes.
there be an email that goes out to stakeholders that points them to this to see it? Okay. I get really good feedback on those emails. That seems to be very well received.
Yeah, we'll do an email blast letting people know, hey, this is on the website. Comment period's open until XYZ. And then they can go and download it and review it and submit comments to Diane.
Very good. All right. Any further comment or discussion on the, yes. Ron?
Oh, no, I have one more new business item to discuss.
Okay, great.
It's in regard to the upcoming ASPPB mid-year meeting.
That's right.
And I know we received the copy and an invitation for that, and it's a $50 registration fee. But we also typically will send a member as indicate our delegate to that meeting, but we also have the annual meeting that's in this fall to consider as well. So didn't know how we were going to set this up with just limiting it to one member attending this year, or the virtual meeting in April, and looking at something in the fall, or how we wanted to handle that.
I'm open to suggestions. Real quick, Patrick and Daryl, the only constraint is we don't necessarily want a quorum there. Is that correct? Or does
Correct.
that matter? Okay.
Correct. You do not want a quorum. Historically, we've sent one member and then either I went or sometimes the GC would go. In this case, I'd be sending Diane. I would like Ms. Moore to go because the BARC committee, the Board Administrator Committee, is pretty active. And I want to get her plugged into that, make sure she's plugged in. Generally, I would say keep it to one board member. Certainly if we were traveling in person, I'd say just one, but even generally I would say keep it to one who can go vote, because you don't know if by some miracle we can have an in-person meeting at the annual meeting in October. I'd like to have as much of that $500 left over to help cover that travel expense as I can.
Ron, this is something that you're obviously paying attention to. Is this something you'd want to do?
Yes, I would like to participate, but also make sure that if anyone else would like to engage in it, that they would have that opportunity as well.
Very good. Anybody else interested? Sounds like there's a nomination for Ron to go. Somebody want to make that nomination?
I make the nomination that Ron
Dr.
do.
Singh moves.
Second it.
Second by Dr. Fletcher. All in favor of sending Ron, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Thank you, Ron.
None opposed. The ayes have it. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you. I'll be attending that.
Take all precautions.
Well, it's all on Zoom.
Oh, good.
So it'll be online in April, and I'll have a report available for everyone at our next meeting.
Very good.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Am I forgetting anything else, Ron? I almost forgot that, and you emailed me on it, so sorry about that. Thank you for keeping me on it. Anything else before we move on? All right. So recommendation. Oh, yep.
No, go ahead.
Recommendations for agenda items for the next board meeting. Anything anybody wants to put on our radar to discuss?
I see.
I noticed.
Oh, and everybody at once. Sorry.
I noticed that there was
Ron,
there was a letter.
No, Andoni.
I'm sorry. I noticed that
No,
there was a
Andoni,
letter.
go.
Okay, let's see. Can I remember where I started?
It's all you, Andoni.
That there was a letter. There was a letter included at I think it was at the very bottom, that was submitted by Betty Dawson from TAPA. And I'm wondering, was that just for us to read, or were we supposed to consider the issues that she brought up regarding the public schools needs?
I don't have a good answer for that. I know that was included in the comment around the rules. Daryl, that was to you. You want to speak on that?
Yeah, that was a comment that Ms. Dawson had submitted, and I told her I would make sure that made it into the board packet whenever y'all were considering those rule changes. So that's why I made sure it was in the board packet for y'all.
Is it up for, is that particular letter or that recommendation up for discussion or not?
It is. I mean, technically I've already voted on the rule, but obviously the meeting's not adjourned. So if there's something in that letter now that you're like, well, I think I want to change my mind.
Okay, I apologize for not relating the letter to the rule change. The issue is, in my opinion, very serious, and the reason I would even bring it up is it relates to my job experience. I worked in immediately after graduating from college, I worked 22 years in exempt status, no license of any kind, working in serious mental health, inpatient hospitals, seriously drug addicted individuals, suicide, the kind of experience that does not exist in professionals in school districts. The LSSPs are really overburdened. Their curriculum is actually changing right now to include this kind of coursework and experience before they graduate. To be prepared, we got a lot of serious problems. I ended up working in school districts without an LSSP, without an LPA, all under the exempt status. I've lost 10 kids to suicide when I worked in another 25 years. I really believe schools need a lot of help, and I sincerely appeal to pushing, I don't know if it's TEA, because they're the ones that are hiring the people, but my phone is going off crazy right now. They want me to come in there and handle suicide again. I said, well, I don't know.
Thank you, Andoni, for that. Anything else on that point? Okay. All right. So coming back to agenda items for the next board meeting. If you don't have it now, you can either email me and Ms. Moore, and we can put other items on the agenda for next meeting if there's something you'd like discussed. Board administrator assignments. Is that if we have any requests of our board administrator? Am I reading that correctly?
Correct.
I don't have any specific homework for Ms. Moore. I think she did a great job of lining up this meeting. If anybody has any requests of her, this is your time.
Well, I'd like to go back for a moment to the recommendations for agenda items and see that we have a rule, a draft rule, looking at addressing the issue that we had with Dr. Stanley and the internship. So if we could look to see about having something drafted, possibly by the next meeting, if not by the following meeting.
That's a Patrick
and
thing,
I don't have
correct?
anything for
Patrick had his
Ms.
head down.
Moore. I support Ms. Moore and all the work that she's put into this as well, and thank her.
Let me ask you, Dr. Palomares, what are y'all looking for? Are y'all looking to change the internship requirements itself, or are you looking for a rule that would allow you to waive those requirements should somebody not meet them?
The second, waive those requirements if someone doesn't meet the current requirements.
Okay,
Essentially,
so
just give ourselves a little bit of discretion to do something that instead of trying to write the rule for every single scenario, to give ourselves just a little bit of bend.
So Patrick, we would want to retool that, like you and I were talking about that respecialization paragraph. Maybe retool that to handle both respecialization and allow them waiver authority?
Because I support fully the current requirements for internship. I think there's a lot of work has gone into setting those standards, and I think they're appropriate standards. So I don't see a change in those. But when we have a situation like this, that's the piece that I would see where our rules would change.
Dr. Palomares, you're on the rules committee, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I can tell you what Patrick and I are going to need help with. All right, let me back up. I get to delegate. I can tell you what Patrick's going to have a problem with, and that is what's the standard, the benchmark for when a waiver? How do we articulate the benchmark for when a waiver should be granted? You know, because if you just say for good cause, like I said, you're going to have everybody and their dog coming in here. So.
Are there any things in place for the rural areas where there is kind of shortage of service or supervisors available or anything?
Dr. Singh, not that I can think of. The one thing I would say in response to that is this board has never taken a restrictive view on telehealth or telesupervision. This board has been very progressive and very proactive in making sure we didn't have any kind of restriction on those. So it's not, you know, if somebody comes to you and says, I'm in Uvalde and I can't find a supervisor, I'm like, well, you don't have to look in Uvalde. You can look in Rains County if you want to, because we don't put limits. Yeah. Especially not now, since we're working on that rule change that TPA had suggested a while back. You know, that rule change is going to really kind of blow open the doors for supervision via Zoom type platforms.
Only experience I have is whenever I make a rule for my classes, my students, and I don't have it enforced the same way for everyone. Mm-hmm. And then I have so much problem. So I do not bend the rules. Yeah. And only times it is in emergencies. And we have such an emergency like pandemic. And at that time you have justifications. But just to do it, because just like you said, somebody's a nice person, somebody had nice practice, so they don't have any complaint against them and all that. That's not sufficient enough to bend the rules and give waivers every time, I feel. And also I commute in 70s, and I graduated in 81. So I commuted from Dallas to Commerce, and so did Brenneman. He was my classmate. We many times carpooled. And we went to school there. It was 65 miles round trip from my house to East Texas State, which is Texas A&M now, Commerce. And I did it for 3 years. And when you could, if you could do that when we didn't have this online, you know, ability to do through Zoom, etc. I don't see why it is so difficult to get good supervision from places like Dr. Calhoun was talking about. And so I think that's all available and possible. Thank you for listening.
All right.
I was just going to say, Daryl, I wonder if maybe we can look at that rule about respecialization and look at language that maybe is inclusive of some statement of equivalent competency in special circumstances, and that would leave us a little bit of room. I think the issue is that it's a pre-doctoral internship, and we're talking about 10 years ago and some poor guidance from internship, and this woman was given a degree with non-equivalent requirements. And that does make it a special circumstance, in my opinion. And so I think going back and trying to rewrite history is really challenging and frankly burdensome. And so I think we need to sort of balance those things when we're looking at this and talk about equivalent competencies. And so I think we just need to be thoughtful about what it is that we're asking for in our language. So I think maybe that might be something that we can look at. Because I don't want to open the door too wide.
Dr. Becker, I'm glad you're on the rules committee.
By the way, I think if we establish some real narrow specific criteria and acknowledge that maybe a waiver in some certain situations might be appropriate. And if you did, like Daryl said, you can't leave it open because everybody's going to be coming in here with every little, you know, I hurt my finger so I couldn't get my internship or something. But if we did some real specific dead end kind of criteria for a waiver, we wouldn't have a problem. I don't know if that's that easy. I'm making it sound easy.
Well, I'll say this. I think that there's some really good direction here for Daryl and for Patrick, and the rules committee has a firm grip on it. So I'm looking forward to seeing what we come up with for the next meeting. So thank you for that. I think that brings us to adjournment. If I've missed anything, the last call. Hearing none, without objection, this meeting is adjourned. And I want to thank you guys very much. Dr. Becker, Dr. Singh, Dr. Calhoun, welcome. And I'm looking forward to working with you so much.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Becker, it's good seeing you again.
Always good seeing y'all.
Dr. Calhoun,
Stay safe.
nice to see